This is Naoki Yoshida.
This is Fern Hall.
And you are listening to Aetheryte Radio.
Aetheryte Radio.
Here we go.
Hello and welcome to Aetheryte Radio, Gamerscape's Final Fantasy XIV podcast. I'm FFXIV. Joining me today. Did I just say my name wrong? It was a little weird sounding. All right.
I was thinking Confusion.
It's been a couple of weeks. How do I do this? How do I host a show? I don't know how do I
Welcome
do
back
this?
to podcast.
Better. Almost
How do I
every time
podcast?
I do the start of the show, I always want to say I'm Fusion X, just because that's how it goes.
I'm FFXIV. All right. Right. Thank you. You got the reference. I appreciate that. I really do. Full house today. We've got Zadidra, we've got Aldino, we've got Rook, and joining us today, we've got Monte Cristo. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's good to be back. Glad I can hang out with you guys.
Every time we need a tank, we're like, "Hey, you're a tank."
Yeah.
Monty, we all suck. Come tell us about tanking.
Our topic for today, we're going to talk a little bit about how jobs and how roles have changed over the years, and how that's affected how you play, if you've switched your main. We thought that would be an interesting thing to talk about when there's nothing else to really talk about right now in terms of Final Fantasy XIV. But before we get into that, some news I'm really excited about because I love spending money on things. Square Enix has announced a Y'shtola Bring Arts figure in the Shadowbringers edition, right? So it's got the black mage look, it's got the staff. They are currently eyeing a November 2020 release for this, and it is currently $89.99 on the Square Enix online store. If you guys remember, a few years ago at E3, they revealed the Estinian Bring Arts figure. So it's going to be that same size. It's about the same price point. Estinian was also available on other retailers. And I believe I paid at least like $10 less, maybe. I haven't seen it yet. I looked, but keep an eye out. Maybe it'll pop up on like CD Japan or AmiAmi or someplace like that. But yeah, definitely picking that up, because I have issues.
She's so cute, though.
She's
does look
so
really cool.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Like, she's very good. And her staff and all the little accessories, and she's like more posable than ever. I'm like, great. We can do some good action stances.
More posable than ever. Was she not posable before? I'm trying to think.
I think there was,
No. The acrylic
there was a-
keychain wasn't posable. The
acrylic,
other acrylic standee wasn't posable. So yeah, she is more. She could have one joint, and she would be the most posable Y'shtola they've ever had.
There was a footnote on the listing about them, I don't know, reworking the joints or something with their style of figurines, so that now you can just pose to your heart's content.
It's probably just a newer version of the Bring Arts figure then. For those of you that aren't familiar, for those of you that care, Bring Arts is basically a slightly smaller scale than like their Play Arts Kai line, which is like their super expensive. Kai figures are like 150 plus usually. Yeah. Back in my day, we just had normal Play Arts, and I think I paid maybe $30 for them. Woo! Now they are expensive. So if they have better joints, awesome, because joints have been an issue. I've actually had to return some figures because of broken joints in the past from Play Arts. But anyway,
wondered what Bring Arts was. So thank you for explaining that.
Yeah, it's a smaller.
Play Arts.
If you had to relate it to something else, they're like Figma. If you know Nendroids, there's also Figma, which are like the more realistic proportioned ones instead of like the little chibi ones. They're kind of like that quality-ish, give or take. So, but yeah, if you're a collector, definitely make sure to check this out. Keep an eye out for the pre-order on the Square Enix store, or other places that you might import similar things. So there you go. And that'll take us into our topic. So we are into 5.0 now. We have seen many a change come into the game since it released. We're not even gonna cover 1.0 because that would be like a whole other discussion. That was a completely different battle system, right? But how have roles changed in the past? How have jobs been adjusted? And have they been adjusted to the point where you're like, nah, I'm gonna play this instead? So first we're going to talk about physical DPS. So for me, obviously, that's Dragoon. I remember getting Dragon Sight, I think is the thing where you like tether the other person. And that was the beginning of Stormblood. Beginning of Stormblood was terrible for Dragoon for a few reasons. Dragon Sight was just, I hated it. Everything about it. I have like several different macros on my hotbar depending on what kind of a party setup I'm in, so I could just click and drag it. I have like a target nearest person that's like basically like the screw it. I don't care who gets it. I'll just use it, whatever. I'll have like a third and fourth target if I'm in like a bigger party, and I know that that's going to be like one of like the DPS, and it's just I can remember, especially early on in Stormblood, I would do a dungeon and then I'd always be partnered with a ranged or a caster, right? And typically they don't stand anywhere near you. So I can remember like kind of like backing off over here, hit the red mage with it, and then walk towards the boss so I could hit it and the tether would disappear. And then I'd like backstep a couple more times, like, hey, come on over. No, okay, thanks.
And back then, you had to be connected to them to get the buff yourself, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
that was
that was the original version
of it. Big part of it.
Oh, dang.
It was a pain. Like I can remember doing like striking dummies and actually calling out my chocobo so I could tether my chocobo so that I could get the buff. And it's just like,
oh my gosh.
Man.
I call the tether the child safety leash.
Yeah.
And it does drive me crazy when the child does not pay attention to you. You're standing, it's like this huge red tether. I recently went through and leveled all of Dragoon. And you're standing there like, there's this huge, gigantic red tether. It's all over the screen. You know it's on you. So Bard, why? You take 2 steps back and the tether go away. Like,
to me, it kind of looks like one of those like Chinese finger traps.
Yeah.
Right. With the way that the texture is on it. But yeah, like, I mean, I can remember, I'd be playing with my wife and I'd be like, cause she does Bard. So I'd be like, hey, you want to like come a little closer? She's like, okay, that's for the thing, right? I'm like, yes, thank you.
Well, I mean, one thing, okay, so with the tether, when it was released in Stormblood, did it function at all differently? I thought it was pretty much the same. It was just that it was new as opposed to like now.
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah. It was one of those things, especially for me as a physical DPS in Stormblood, where you have the release of Samurai. And Samurai I love for a lot of reasons. There's no stance timer. There's no like supporting anybody else. It's just like, I'm a DPS. I'm worrying about my DPS. I'm not worrying about buffing other people. I'm just doing my thing. I don't have to play, positional dancing to keep, Blood of the Dragon up or anything. And I love that about Samurai. But then you have Dragoon that gets, Blood of the Dragon, and you have to keep this thing up. And there are transitions in fights where it's basically just a giant middle finger to any job that has a stance timer. And it just, Stormblood Dragoon was, especially starting off, it got a little better, but initially it was not good. But now,
I'm curious. I was going to say, I'm curious.
In chat is saying the tether used to be shorter too. Is that true?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
So it did change a little bit. It did shift. Well, that's nice that at least later on they gave you a little bit more leeway with it. But I'm curious because Fusion, you brought up exactly like the release of Samurai, right? Like a lot of these jobs we can trace different periods or times within the game that, they maybe were disaster, Magic Bard, or things like that.
Yeah.
We're going to get to Magic Bard. Don't worry.
I mean, we will. You can trace these evolutions of classes, right? But there is always this game changer that happens when a new class is introduced. So I'm curious for you, like how Samurai came in, right? Like what would make you want to play any of the other melee if Samurai is like just as good damage wise, less punishing with positionals, doesn't have something like a dependent tether? Like what would make you still want to play those other ones then?
I mean, I think part of
that's the only answer that I
in Stormblood, yes, right? Because there were the meta was a little more specific with what you needed. You still had damage debuffs and stuff, so that's part of it. I think other part is aesthetic. Other parts of it might include Twitter handles, gamer tags,
familiarity.
Yeah, Yeah, it's
Yeah,
and it's
nostalgia is
funny.
a big one.
Yeah, nostalgia. I mean, and it's
You're right
funny
on.
too because I can remember years and years ago, playing 11, be like, oh, that guy's name is like White Mage something, and he's like
Mhm.
on Samurai. I'm like, that's silly. And now here I am, Raffledurg on like everything, and I'm maining Machinist. So all right. Um,
Well,
but yeah.
I only bring it up because I think, especially in Melee, more than almost any of the other roles, right? There has been this ongoing discussion for all the years that the game has been out about whether they should, if a class has more technical difficulty or like a higher technical skill ceiling, if you pull it off with positionals and all these different things, should you be able to get more raw DPS if you play it well? Versus the mentality of making all of them pretty even keeled. And I feel like right now, at least in Shadowbringers, they're pretty on par, largely because we had some of those buffs adjusted and things like that. Where now, I mean, yes, like those meta compositions that might optimize various crit buffs and things, or like, synergies, which they sort of took out, have now been moved and sort of changed so that really a lot of our melee DPS are essentially the same minus a few utilities. And I'm just curious, I don't know if anybody, like how everybody else feels about it, because I don't play Melee. It's like I just went through and leveled them all myself, but I get this question all the time. Like, is it worth it for me to play Monk if it's easier for me to mess up and I can get just as much damage out of Samurai?
I mean, and again, I think it comes back down to each job, even Melee, right? Like, yes, they're all Melee, but they all play a little different. They all handle a little differently. They have a few, like Monk can't backflip, so there are little things here and there. There's the aesthetic of the job. And I think for me, what bothers me a little bit, and this is now, the Machinist main, the 5.0 Machinist main. Previous Machinists have been not great. I can remember fights coming out and they're talking about like uptime strats for DPS. Because the boss has to move a certain way, mechanics happen in certain places, and you need to hit the boss on the side or you do less damage. As somebody that's played a lot of melee DPS, I hate positionals. Like, I get it, right? You need to have something there for the higher tier players to do. But I just, as somebody that's playing Machinist now, like, I don't have ranged positionals. Like, you don't have to worry about any of that crap. And that's awesome, and I love it, and that's why I'm maining Machinist. But it's just one of those things where you need to, and I get it, right? You need to have a nice, like, entry point to where, like, oh, I kind of know what I'm doing decent damage, and then you need that little bit of ground where I really know what I'm doing and I'm maximizing, as much as I can. I get that. But yeah, for me, like, I'm not crazy about positionals. I know with Shadowbringers, they scaled that back on Dragoon a little bit, but then they also added the new tack. So if you finish that combo and you get that side hit and the back hit, or the back hit, whatever order you do it, if you get both of them, you get an extra attack that then weaves in everything else. I think that's really nice. That feels really good. But that's my 2 cents on it.
For me, it's two things. Mostly, and one of them is what Charles said. In a static, you can't really have 2 samurai. In a lot of statics, it's a 2 melee situation. So you have your samurai, and then you have whatever the other person decided they're better at, I guess. We actually, for a while, on our static, had Monk and a Dragoon, and the guy who was playing Dragoon was like, "Why am I playing this if I can play samurai and just do better?" And he did. He went from Dragoon. He wasn't a bad Dragoon. He went to Samurai, and he's just overall better.
Yeah. The situation that I really don't like, this is the thing that I like least about this game, 100%, is the way that buffs are done. Because, moving from Dragoon to Samurai, or, back and forth, will up your damage, but may lower the group's damage. Or you may because it's a really hard decision to make if you're struggling, right? If you're like, oh, we're in progression, we want to be better. Like, there's so much you have to think about by switching just one to someone, to like a black mage or a samurai. and I really don't like the way that works, and I
It's
don't know how to fix it.
Yeah, I mean, it's that weird thing of, if you're in a group, it's like, who gets dance partner, right? It's like, okay, well, this person is doing the lowest amount of damage, so not them, which is like, it seems almost counterintuitive in some ways,
Right.
because it's like, this person's doing the least amount of damage, so we don't want to increase their damage more. We want to increase the damage of the person that's doing more damage already, and it's that's the thing too. Yeah.
I've been totally not doing that thing that we're not supposed to do, parsing. But
Sure.
Through magic, I can decipher which DPS has done the best at the end of a fight. And then the next week, and it's weird too, because from fight to fight with our static, it changes. Sometimes people I click with a fight better, right? So I'll be like, hey, just so you know, I need you to remind me, because I have a terrible memory, to give you a dance partner on this specific fight next week. All right? Okay, cool.
Then they all forget.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, go ahead.
Because it matters, but it doesn't matter if you're clearing it. You know what I mean? Like, it's
right.
It's one of those things where it does matter, and it doesn't feel good to be that dragoon that could be a samurai, and it doesn't feel good. I don't think I know. I wouldn't feel good to be that monk. That's like, oh no, my buff went away. Because Tether's gone, right?
Yep.
Tether's gone, and
the amount of
crit buff
times
is gone.
At the beginning of Stormblood, where like I'd be doing like Susano, and like during that little transition, my Blood of the Dragon dropped. I'm like, great, I hate everything about this. Meanwhile, I can AFK on Samurai, build up a couple of my Send things, and like come back hours later, and they're still there. Like, come on.
I do agree. I totally agree, because it feels like Samurai, weirdly enough, feels like it was the one that got added in over all of the sort of development of Melee that kind of nullified a lot of what the other Melees had to do as part of being Melee. You know, like keeping up this buff, having whatever kind of boost or partner thing or utility sort of thing that you had, having these positionals that procced in some kind of way, right? And Dragoon by far is my favorite to play, because I do love the aesthetic, and especially with Shadowbringers, now that they have made some of that animation locking that was so good for the aesthetic, but so bad for staying alive. It's like, I'm really glad, because I like the way it plays. I like the way that it flows. I really love the aesthetic.
It flows so much better now.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. But it's tough because Samurai is there. And while it doesn't have a utility, because they removed those synergies, the utilities a lot of times, or the buffs at this point, they can make a difference, but it's just like all of you were saying. It's this thing where it's like, well, if I'm such a proficient player, or, whatever, that my personal DPS is high, great. Or I guess I could kind of boost the party, or maybe Mantra if we really need for some healing stuff. But like Samurai can essentially pull the numbers, which is what Melee does, without those more punishing mechanics and without as many positionals. And it's tough, because I feel like that should not be the case.
Your job as a Melee DPS is to stay alive and do damage, and for Samurai it's easier to do both than any other job. And
well, Samurai does have 2 positionals, so they do have a side and a back thing.
They do.
And I think the biggest issue is that there are no support role. There's no support role in the game. And so they're like, all right, Dragu can like buff crit damage, and that's like a support-ish thing. And then Ninja can do its thing.
Poor ninjas.
Ninja,
I feel so bad for ninjas.
I actually, I was thinking, there's 3, right? There's 3 Melee. No, there's more.
Right, there's 3 Melee DPS.
Oh, right,
and the
Ninja.
half support DPS that they added, which is Ninja. Like, I don't know why they did it.
Ninja is so Ninja has such good aesthetic, and like,
it's so awesome.
I love, oh my gosh, all the little quirky animations, and like you mess up, you get the bunny on your head. Like, that's delightful to me. I will not lie. But I think out of all the Melee, and please, all of you probably know more about this than I do, because I'm just working on my Ninja right now. But from what I know from like running in a static, we had a Ninja Stormblood coming into Shadowbringers, where ninjas are a vanishing breed, and I have no idea what they're doing. Like, they feel like they're the ones that got hit the most with that change, and now really are like, they're like, I don't do anything particularly good enough that you would choose someone, like, just pick me over somebody else,
When you look at Summoner, who got a trick attack, that nobody even knows that summoner has a trick attack.
I didn't
But
know
they
that.
do?
That's
Yeah.
Okay.
It's an AoE trick attack
The more you
for
know.
everyone in your party from your pet. Yeah, exactly. Why? I don't know.
Yeah.
Monte, you actually played Ninja.
Yeah,
with
you made it for a while.
the change, right?
Yeah, Ninja and Monk are my two favorite melee jobs just because when I'm melee, I want to stay busy. Like, I don't play range most of the time other than leveling it because I feel bored. I'm just sitting there, like,
Okay.
I'm not doing anything, so I just get bored and I get not pay attention, then I die, right?
Mm.
And then, so, if I wanted to go lazy, then I'll go Samurai. But Ninja just got floor. And the reason why they vanish all the time is if you use a Mudra to put up your I forget what it's called now, but to go faster, then you hide, then it resets your
Hotan.
Mudras.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Hotan.
Mhm.
And so it resets, so you get 2 again. But yeah, it's just like, I feel like playing Ninja now at 80, I'm just trying to roll my face across the keyboard
Right.
and trying to get stuff like exactly perfect. And then it wasn't quite like that in Stormblood. But they did make some changes that are kind of good. Like, you don't have to be at a flank for trick attacks to go off. You can do it anywheres, and that's a godsend. And then
Yeah.
they removed a lot of the positionals, but you're keeping busy with trying to do different things and then doing different mudras. And then one of the was the Kasatsu, I think, that amps your mudras.
Yeah, the crit one, yeah.
It used to be depending on your latency, you'd either do the shuriken or the lightning bolt, depending on how quick if your latency was, you could go quicker or not. And then now it's more of, now you have something that it morphs into, so now you have to do that. So it's like, I still love it, but man, it's just, sometimes it's like I have to want to be busy to play.
Right.
So it's an
So-
extreme example of the Dragoon to Samurai. It's the
Yeah.
opposite of the Samurai.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
it's got the lowest DPS of the 4.
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
And also
problem.
the most effort, question mark?
And it gives the most to a group,
Yes.
kind of, because trick attack,
Mhm.
but that doesn't feel good. Like, no one plays a melee DPS to buff another melee DPS.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And that's why I loved Samurai so much. It's just, I don't need to worry about all this crap, especially after, because like Dragoon was the first one I took to cap, right? And I'm like, all right, I got the crit thing, and now I got this weird stupid tether that nobody works with me on, and then I can just hop on Samurai. I don't have to worry about any of that crap, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and it's tough too because with Dancer, I mean, trick attack for a while was, like, oh yeah, we have this like boost that will directly affect our damage and we can get it periodically and we can time everything with that. But now it's like we do have these other, Dancer in particular, but I mean also Astrologian with some of the things they changed there to just make it a little more consistent as far as like buffing damage continuously. It's like if it does a decent amount less, or even a little bit, because the meta is always about that, you know what I mean? And that trick attack can be compensated for in other ways. It's tough to be like, why fill this spot specifically with like a ninja, which is, I think, really a shame, because ninja is a lot of fun and it's really cool. And Monte, I'm curious, like, what do you think that they could change? Do you think it's just a matter of like upping the raw potency kind of thing so that it becomes less of that utility and becomes more of just like, yeah, if you execute this well, you get the payoff? Or do you think there's like something else they could do with it to make it going forward a little bit better or strengthen it a little bit more?
I think kind of like Monk, I think there's a good floor gap. Like, you can play Monk and Ninja to a point to where you're like, okay, DPS in like dungeons and stuff. And then there are people who are just exceedingly amazing at these jobs and they just, they floor it. Of course, that could be from, dancer buffs and so on and so forth. But I would think that they need to like dial that back just a little bit. If they increase the potency, then they might have to take trick attack away, because it seems like they're trying to compensate for having trick attack by having a lower damage output. But like the skill gap from being okay to great seems huge. Like, you have to hit like everything exactly on the dot, or you're like basically you're like, fish out of water kind of deal.
Yeah, they have like the shortest window. Like
Mhm.
there's a lot of jobs where, I mean, in particular like machinist, during the time where you're overheated, hey, you better be pressing those buttons, right?
Yeah.
You don't have much of a window to like deal with mechanics at the same time. And Ninja's window is so short because they have such haste and they have to do so many button presses. It's just like if you miss it, that's going to be a big difference. And for some jobs,
Yeah.
it's not as big, So it feels weird to play.
That's what's so nice now about the new machinist is you can kind of trigger like when you want to deal with that heat expenditure, and that's
right.
5.0 machinist. Oh my god! I mean, you remember when we sat down at the media tour? We went in and we talked to Yoshida. I'm just like, machinist. Like that was like, did I even have a question? I was just like, machinist. He's like, yeah. Like he's like, yeah, that's right.
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah,
no, I'm not kidding. That's exactly what
that is exactly what happened. He's like, yeah, it's like we added a third job, and it's just machinist. It's so good.
Has there been a time with melee DPS? And I ask this knowing I do not know the answer, so I'm curious if any of you do. Was there a time where like any of the melees were just a flaming dumpster fire? Or where one was like so good it was insane?
Yes.
I think Stormblood Dragoon is close to dumpster fire.
Stormblood Dragoon?
Stormblood was actually very harsh to melee overall, I feel, except for maybe Samurai.
and I think a part of this too, right, is because Stormblood is when we got the job gauges, and so they're like, okay, we need a mechanic now, or we need to take existing abilities, and we need to somehow make a thing. I said job gauges, not. I said job gauges, not fellowships. I don't know why you're getting cranky yet.
Look, there are two things I had strong feelings about. Fellowships, obviously, that one everyone I know in the world feels very up in arms about it, not just me alone. But the other was, and we'll get to this, job gauge white mage, which was like, what have you done and why did you do this?
It's really interesting looking at the art books and seeing like concepts for the different job gauges. You're like, oh, that's what they That's interesting. But yeah, let's move into range DPS. Obviously,
really quick before we do.
Yes.
My other thing, because many eons ago I said I thought there were two things. We went through the one. The other one is just and this will apply across the board to every job actually. Sometimes your playstyle just clicks with a job.
Yeah.
And that's the one you stick with. So regardless of the goodness or badness of the job itself, if you click with a job and your fingers are just, yes, this is how this job plays, yes, you become good at that job, and trying to do anything else is just like, why am I wasting my time?
Yeah.
So yes, that's the other thing.
That's the thing. Play what you enjoy. That's right. That's the underlining. Play what you have fun with.
It's the reason for enjoyment. That's going to be up to everyone, because some people are like, if I put in the effort and don't get the damage, then I'm not enjoying it. And some people are like, well, I want an easier time. And some people are like, I want a harder time. So, like, it's up to your enjoyment, but
as they say, you do you, boo-boo.
That's right.
So range DPS, obviously I think the bigger change, right, was with Heaven's Word. When we had casting timers for ranged attacks, which sucks because that was when we got Machinist. And in 2.0 I was a Dragoon and a Bard. Bard was my secondary, and then we get into Heaven's Word and they're like, hey, steampunky like ranged gun guy. I'm like, hell yeah, sign me up. And so I played it. I wasn't super crazy about it, which really sucked because I'm like, man, I really want this job to be good. Which is why I'm so excited about 5.0 Machinist now. But eventually they're like, yeah, that was maybe not good. So they changed it. I think that's
spoke to several people who like the cast bar. I'm not entirely sure why.
Okay.
Maybe it's because that's what they started with. Like they didn't know the glory that was Bard without a cast bar.
Yeah.
True.
It drove me crazy for years and years and years because 2.0, yes, 2.0, didn't have the cast bar. It was super fun, and I was pretty fucking good at it. And then they added cast bar, and I had to reteach myself this entire job, and I was not as good at it. And then the next expansion, they were like, "Oh, sorry, we realized that was bad, so we're taking it away. Teach yourself the job again." So yes, you do have to reteach yourself a little bit with every job every time there's an expansion, and they tweak things.
Yeah.
They tweaked. This is not a tweak. This is like they took the dial, they ripped it off, they threw it away. You have to find the dial. It's already broken. Duct tape it back on. Make something else. I don't know. Teach yourself a new job every time. I'm just like, why?
Yeah.
Why?
Oh, Bard. Bard is like, it is, okay, so ranged physical DPS now is definitely my favorite DPS to play. Like, if I'm not healing, I'm probably doing ranged physical because I do love that, like, liberation of movement, being able to just run around and, like, position stuff and get around and fire off your abilities and do a little bit of that support or utility. Like, I think that's super fun. But there have been these, like, weird things with Bard in particular, which I think then when, like, Machinist got brought in, there has been this whole issue with, like, the identity of ranged physical. And Bard in particular has this issue in and of itself where it's like, it is an archer, but it's also a bard. So, like, combining those two things into one has always created this weird problem of, well, does it magically, like, through the power of magic by singing songs and strumming a harp, does it buff your party? Or does it shoot arrows real good? Or does it do somehow a little bit of both? And so, like, I can see how when we got into Heavensward, they decided, yeah, we maybe need to lean more into the magical side of this. Like, it doesn't make sense for it just to mostly be an archer that sometimes sings a tune and does, like, a little buff. So, like, maybe it needs to be a little bit more magical in its design. But then you get this whole problem with Machinist being introduced where it's like, well, is Machinist magical then? Because they're both the same kind of category? Or is, like, how are we doing the inspiration for Machinist here?
Well, technically, the bullets that we shoot are ethereal energy.
See? So and you've got your little, like, ethereal gauge thing on your hip. Yeah. And it's like, okay, I get it. But I do think that, like, I'm so glad they moved away from that. Right. I'm so glad. Mm-hmm. And I mean, even into Shadowbringers, we had some weird issues with Bard because Bard is in and of it's a buff. Mm-hmm. That's what it is in everything, in D&D, in everything. And when they said to me, oh yeah, Dancer's coming out and it's going to buff and it's going to damage. And I was like, great. And then they were like, Bard no longer does that. And I was like, what?
I will never forget the shared confusion between me and Aldi at the media tour for Shadowbringers. So, like, all right, job changes, blah, blah, blah. We're going to kind of strip the range DPS of support and instead focus on Dancer. And it's like,
huh? You can say how mad I was. I was like, this is dumb. This is really stupid. I hate everything about this.
I know. Like, I was furious. Okay. I was like, why is it even called a bard then? You might as well have entirely overhauled the whole theme and made it Ranger. And just and like, why in the world is it called a bard? I mean, Ranger would be great.
I am still bothered by when they did, what was it, Stormblood, I think, when they changed a bunch of what the songs do and stuff. Mage's Ballad. Mage's Ballad. What does it have to do with anything involving mages? Like,
it's ridiculous. It was also especially terrible because they even removed, what was it? The mana replen.
Mana shift.
Was it mana shift that you can? No. It's like it was.
No,
it was,
no,
it was like
refresh.
Yes.
Yeah, so they removed
refresh after they took it off of Mage's Ballad. It was refresh.
Refreshed, so even that was gone, and I was like, what? I mean, if you remove the mana replen from everybody, and then you remove the buffs from Bard, the very least you could have done to, like, let Bard hold its own as a, support range would be to give it and let it be the only class out of any of them that can now replen mana, especially because at the beginning of Shadowbringers, we did have Astrologian, which was really hurting for mana, and a few other classes where, when some of that stuff got taken away, there wasn't quite a good like balance for it, and they were struggling a little bit. White mage didn't care. They gave zero cares. No cares because white mage no longer has to struggle. But it has been really weird seeing the way that they kind of balanced that. I'm so glad that the buffs are back for Bard though, because otherwise it just felt like, why are we doing this?
It was a big mistake.
I mean, I can remember it too
solid.
when they had that change, because they're like, all right, so here's what we're gonna do. Dancer is still like the support job, even though it's still a DPS. It's the support job, big giant finger quotes. But we realized that Bard is a Bard, so we're gonna give you a little bit to play with. And then Machinist, you are the ranged samurai. Just do whatever the hell you want. Don't worry about anybody. And I'm like,
so funny that you like both
sign
of
me
those.
up. Yeah, it's just, I'm playing this to just hit things. If I wanted to play a support job, I would play a support job. Unfortunately, there is no such thing in Final Fantasy XIV. So
I want to bring up this point that chat's made. Remember when Bard had healer limit break?
Oh yes.
I do.
How many times we won,
I
and then
do.
it was like, hey, I really wish you could raise everybody right now.
2.0, Bard had healer limit break. And at the time, playing Bard, I was like, boy, I sure wish I had a damage doing limit break. That'd be so cool. And now that I have one and I never get to use it, I wish I had the healer one back.
I kind of do too. I didn't know that because I wasn't playing Bard at that time. I kind of wish that you had that too. Or like, it's tough because with them grouping all the limit breaks together, I mean, of course, like you kind of have to with the shared roles and all of that. But every now and then I do think to myself how great it would be if each individual job had its own like special version of the limit break to some degree, right? And like a res that then applied some kind of immediate buff to the party on Bard would be so good. That would be so cool. I'd be into that. Machinist, I just started playing Fusion, which I know you saw.
I did, and I good job. Awesome.
Thanks. I do really love it, actually. I'm not gonna lie. It's super fun. It feels really good to play right now. I really like the way it builds on itself. And that DPS output is nice. And I mean, they did bump Bard a little bit with DPS output too, which also feels good to play it. But like, I was kind of surprised that with all the things and the way they kind of like, I think focused and narrowed down on giving like Machinist to the gizmos, the robot, all of this stuff that really does make it feel like it has more of an identity now. It really does make it all kind of flow together in a fun way. I'm really liking it.
I love the robot. I love the robot. I mean, we talked about this before the media tour. It's like, when they show that job change video, right? What do we think is going to be crazy? And I was like, I don't know, Machinist might have something crazy. Yeah. And then it's this giant robot. It's like, yes, absolutely.
So for me, it's... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, it was going to launch into...
Do it.
I've been waiting. Okay. Physical range DPS is so broken. It's so incredibly broken. Why do they do such low damage, like, in general? Just why? Because, it feels good. Like, all three of them feel pretty good, but you get no results, and I don't know why. Like,
I was getting some results.
I mean, through the magic of the internet.
For samurai levels or for like range DPS
because
levels?
Machinist is supposed to be the range DPS samurai. It's not even close. Not even close. Nowhere near close.
It is true. I mean, you're almost trading mobility at this point, right?
Yeah.
Like it's the idea that in theory you should have more consistent uptime, thus being able to more reliably contribute DPS. But again, you're right. It's like, especially if you have casters, which oftentimes fill those last couple roles, it's like you might have like an additional cleanse, an additional stun, which I can think of at least in a few fights that's pretty good.
Like
even in like Shiva, like there are some things that those are definitely good for. But when it comes down to it again, and it's like we have these two melee, these two ranged. Yeah, you're right. It's like if their utility across the board isn't good enough to justify the lower DPS, then like, is it mostly just that your player that is filling that slot isn't comfortable with a melee?
Yeah,
I hate saying that because I love range.
I was actually just thinking that it's interesting when you think about the idea of, your caster slot might be taken up by a red mage for prog while you're learning stuff. Maybe your physical melee DPS decide to play a range during that time as well to get a feel for things and not have to. I mean,
the thing that I think, and it hurts range and it hurts casters, and this is just like me in my playing of MMOs. I hate this. So we said that the mobility is supposed to give you more uptime, right? It's supposed to give you more uptime.
Mm-hmm.
But because you have the mobility, you typically do the harder mechanics, which then take your uptime. So it is not actually more uptime for you.
However, this is actually a point I was going to bring up. At the start of the game, 100%, Bard was doing all of the extra mechanics. There were basically mechanics put into each turn fight.
Yes.
That was like, well, this is the Bard mechanic.
Yep.
You handle this thing while everybody keeps punching
Since
the boss.
you can move and shoot, yeah.
Yes. And those have gone way downhill. Like I, off the top of my head, cannot think of one in this new tier at all. I'm sure there's one, but can't think of one. Anybody else?
That's a good point. The one that comes to mind for me is not this tier, but the fight that like made physical ranged, I think, shine for me was the Rathalos fight. Because it wasn't about how much damage you were doing, it was about how many hits you were landing on Rathalos in the second half of the fight to crash him to the ground. And I loved that because I thought it did let a lot of classes that don't always get to shine. Because like if we had mechanics like that in another raid or something that could really justify like, well, it's not just about the raw DPS numbers, it's about consecutive hits, or it's about, you know, this movement thing, or it's whatever. And it's not like our movement stuff hasn't been punishing on melee in Stormblood and even in Shadowbringers. But yeah, you're right. There's not anything that's really a mechanic made for them, Zen.
Avatar, the metal tree guy, there was that tether that Bard specifically had to pick up and run away from everybody, and there were like 3 or 4 of them during the fight. Somebody in chat mentioned Medusa or Melusine.
Yeah, Melusine.
You were the one who had to go and get the Renault ogre guy and drag him around. And you had to be like really paying attention to what you were doing because other mechanics are still happening and you still have to do them.
You know, and that might have been coming off the 1.0, the 1.0 Bard
it
too.
Does a little.
Where?
That's the problem.
Because I actually want an example because I can't think of one.
It doesn't happen in that you can't damage anymore. So a range or a melee could do it, but now it's self-imposed. Now we say because of uptime, they shouldn't do that mechanic. So we give those mechanics to the range because they should be able to do it. So now it's self-imposed. It's not, So now, how do you balance that? Because every group's going to use their machinist differently. How do you make them do samurai damage when you don't know what mechanics they're going to be doing? You know what mechanic samurai is going to be doing? 0. Or as little as possible, just like Black Mage, right? Black Mage and Samurai actively try not to do it. But with these jobs, they are the ones doing it. So why is their damage so low? Is it because it's low because they just didn't balance it right? Or is it because we're using it differently than they thought we were? Kind of like the ninja situation when it first came out.
Well, and and I think that comes back to that idea, like, if you're clearing it, does it really matter how much right? Yeah. So it's that weird kind of dance and balancing act where, okay, you'll probably have, a physical DPS, you'll have a ranged DPS, and it just works.
Yeah.
Well, but here's the thing. In theory, and that is totally my mentality. I'm like, if we're clearing it, it's steady, it's smooth, we're good, right? But that is not what a lot of serious raiders think.
Yes.
Right? The idea is about the parse. Just the magical number that flows into our heads, as Zen said, with no supplemental add-ons.
Computer geniuses.
Yes, we're all computer geniuses.
Counting up mathy things as they fly across the screen.
But like the idea that, if we do more damage, we clear the fight faster, we push phases, we skip things we don't want to, and we then have this number that we can reference. We have this color that we can reference. And this is across the board in all MMOs, right? The idea that like damage is king. And that's part of what, and we'll get into this with the healers, that's part of what was so frustrating to me with Astrologian changes, because that was specifically a change made in response to that mentality in the raiding community. And the fact that because our content is made in such a way that if you just pump bigger numbers, as you like optimize your class, optimize the fight, get better gear, get better weapons, then you do pretty much just blast the fight. Like, we don't have mechanics that test these other things often, or like you need this class for this specific fight because it does this thing that is not at all DPS related, but that has to do with mobility or, you know, using this stuff or, you know, whatever it is. It creates this weird issue. And it's funny because as I was thinking through that tier, or our most recent tier, Ramu actually has a mechanic that I think could be good for bards, except they put a tank buster at the end of it. It's that bird tether. Yeah, the bird ad where you have to keep moving to keep it away. But because it has a tank buster at the end, the off tank has to take it. So then the off tank is losing up.
You're Monte over here sighing, like, yep, that's
every time.
But yeah, no, I think it's funny that I think because they want to make all classes playable, which is a good goal and an honest goal, and I do think that I like that mentality more than there being classes that you're forced to take, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it creates this problem where there are no niches in fight design that a specific role might really shine in, and that you might need to have somebody for even just this one fight that plays bard to come in and do.
So here's my thing. I do think that they should raise the potency for ranged DPS across the board just a smidge, not just because I play one, but if they actually balance them out, if a machinist, well, I guess machinist, because it doesn't buff anybody else, could be okay to do the same as samurai, right?
Yes.
But they couldn't do it for bard or dancer,
right?
Because then you would just take all dancers.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and that's the philosophy that they have, and it's a philosophy of a lot of MMOs, is you pay a tax for your utility, right? You pay a DPS tax for your mobility, if you can raise, if you can bring, you know, like anything else to the group, and that makes sense, right? But it really is a zero-sum game. You know, like, you not bringing this buff literally does take it away from someone else. So it's like, why, how do you, and, you know, some places, which I won't mention, just through the magic of the internet, they've changed the way that they rank what those numbers are. And they've moved to adding in your contributions from buffs as well, which is a great idea, and I think that that's really helped a bit demystify how this works, and we can see that it's really close to equal. But with those mechanics, you just drop down. Like you were talking about Ramu, the storm clouds. You gonna tell me that a melee is gonna go out to stand in the cloud? No, you're not gonna be the one furthest away.
No,
you're not. So, I think you might be muted.
I fixed it. Okay. So they have to, but they don't have to for as long. There's a lot of little things where it's like, drop a thing, everybody run out to that thing. But if you have a choice,
then come back.
It's not the melee who are doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's that they're not forcing us to do it. We're making those choices because of uptime, and it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Then how do you fix range? How do you fix range?
It's so interesting. Oh, go ahead, Fusion. Go ahead.
It's also that design thing, right? Where it's, you want players to be able to take in whatever jobs that they want. Yeah. So you don't want that mechanic that's like, oh, you need a bard. But then you also have that mentality of you want to try and eliminate the meta, right? Where you need this job, and this job. I mean, I can remember, you know, back in like 1.0, we would do Black Mage burns on Garuda. Yep. I went on bard. I just spammed my bard stuff, or even in dungeons, I would spam the speed song because of the time chest that they had in 1.0. You know, it was, I always love saying, like, when 2.0 came out, you know, seeing the sisters spawn in the Garuda fight, I'm like, whoa, like, that's cool that they added something new, and people are like, that was in 1.0. I'm like, oh, I never saw it, because I always Black Mage burned it. But it's hard, because you need to design a fight to where that being able to fall into that niche isn't something that's possible, but then you also have to consider, you know, past changes, future changes. It's a really weird act that they have to try and balance.
Yeah, and I'm not saying, you know, I'm not destroying them for it. No MMO has fixed this. There's not. I don't think there is one that's like the traditional tab targeting MMO that has ever fixed that hybrid tax, you know, utility tax.
It's a fundamental like design question about it and how we go about it. And yet it is interesting because 14 does stand out on the market as one of the only MMOs that lets you play every class on one character. So the idea of like, I mean, even just us talking here, right, about raids and things where we're going, well, you know, you've got your 2 melee and then you've got your 2, you know, ranged or your casters. Like, it's very funny because on one hand, yes, that lets people get classes and then really learn them and excel at them and main in those and gear them and all of that stuff, right? But on the other hand, and I think this is where we do see these problems or just like questions about ranged DPS, because they're still my favorite to play. I still love them. And even through the evolution, I do, right? But there is this kind of weird question then of like, why does that always have to be how this is structured? Like in a lot of other MMOs, if I have a class that has a whole bunch of skills, right? And I get to a new boss, and maybe at any given time, I can only have X amount of skills on the bar, right? So it's about kind of how I've built the class or what I'm thinking or what I'm doing with it. And this boss makes me use a skill that I never use in any other fight. That's part of the flexibility of that system, because you're going, hey, I might have less skills at any given time, but how I respond to each different fight might be different. Guild Wars 2 ESO come to mind for me on this.
Wildstar, they did a little bit.
Wildstar. Yeah, like, so in theory, having these different categories of classes and being able to play all different classes on one character then kind of makes you go like, well, couldn't we have some fights where, like it's this is a part of the kit and the part of the things that this game offers to you.
So, in a way, with the class abilities, not as extreme as something like ESO, where they're like, here, have 10 abilities out of your billion that you can have, but all of your side abilities, you could only pick 5 out of the 10 initially, right? So if you knew you were going into a fight where you didn't need to stun, you're like, well, I don't need that. I can take something else more useful.
Yeah.
Well, and then you get the healers that are like macroing in like protect, like in and out, like at the beginning of the day.
I had a macro to switch out something and teletalk. But they got rid of that. People, I guess overall the feedback was that people didn't like it.
They decided this is dumb. Let's not make it dumb.
Well, yeah. And there was also the sort of problem there with the fact that like in a lot of the designs and the fights and all sorts of things, maybe 3 of those skills really got used. You know what I mean? So people never used the other ones. So it creates this like, it does create this interesting question, because then for something like ranged DPS and the evolution that class has taken, I totally agree with what you were saying, Aldino. I totally agree with what everybody was saying. We don't have enough utility or diverse enough utility in the game to really make them like really, I think, punish them for DPS because they bring so much to the table. And while it does make a difference, there are these like weird questions of then like, if there's not anything in the game that's specifically calling for the mobility of ranged DPS, then like how else do we make them stand out if the structure of all of our fights is going to be like 2 melee, 2 ranged, and we have to figure out how we sort of compensate for that, right?
I think at least for me, when I decide on a job, a lot of the times I do pick a quote unquote support, even though I guess we don't have them in this game, but I would consider the ranged DPS overall faux support, right? So I like to play a support job because that's the sort of stuff my brain pays attention to. I'm like, everybody's MP is this. I have this buff here that I need to redo right now. You know, little things that everybody is doing that I can help make better, right? So that's just the sort of gameplay that I like. And I think that plenty of other people feel that way also. And that's why across the board, you get that sort of extra job. And I think it would, like, the damage thing doesn't bother me. I think it would help the game overall if they did and introduce the job range DPS to more people and who might enjoy them if they did buff potency and whatnot a bit more. But that doesn't bother me in particular, because that's not the part of the job that I'm aiming to do. I'm aiming to put this buff here and put this buff here and make sure this person has enough MP. I was very sad when they took away refresh, because that was something that I enjoyed. Like, I'm doing all the stuff. Everybody good? Yep. Okay. Keep going. Right. So I don't know. That's
right.
That's the sort of stuff
I forgot
enjoy.
that was even a thing. I used to have 2 different types of turrets on Machinist. Wow.
It was.
Yeah.
I feel like they could do something too with, I mean, haste has been talked about so much in the game. Or like even Peloton being something that you could use in combat. Like, I know there's a lot of discussions about that, but like that would be something that I think would have value, right? Because melee DPS and people using sprint and especially end gamer things, or even just anywhere, right? Like having that little bit of a speed boost could be something that people find valuable enough that they do want to bring it. I love playing them too, and I totally agree, Zen. Like for me as a player personally, I prefer something that lets me kind of multitask and have my eye on the party and on enemies and do a whole bunch of things and kind of play God in the background and like run around and fire off. But like that's super fun to me. I like contributing to help the party succeed overall together. So like ranged physical is one of my faves. And I have loved Dancer, which I think has been a lot of fun. Even if when it got introduced, I think a lot of these questions about how we were balancing and catering and dealing with ranged DPS, and that's happened since Heavensward, right? Like there's always been this question about it. So I think moving forward, while they aren't in a bad place, there is something to be said about like their identity overall as a unit and how they kind of hold ground against, I think, a lot of the other classes and the way they evolve.
I mean, I really...
Okay.
I was just saying, taking it way, way back, I really miss 1.0 Bard because, you know, you would run forward and cast, you know, go with the DPS song on the physical people, then come back. You know, it's like 11 Bard, you know, it's you're constantly running back and doing stuff. And it kept me busy, so I guess that's why I liked 1.0 Bard a lot. But
yeah,
you know,
I honestly I agree with you 100%. Having to keep track of, you basically are like, okay, well, the ranged DPS are here, or the casters are here, healers are here, melee DPS are here, and you would run to each group and buff in like a small circle, and then run to the next group and buff in a small circle. That's when you really needed the mobility, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the like small like I'm doing this here and I'm doing this here that I really enjoyed. So I kind of miss that a little bit.
That's cool, honestly.
I think it'd be very difficult with some of the current fight structure that we have.
Yeah.
That's fine.
And like, the range of abilities now too, because the range on everything is huge, so that you don't get that one person that, you know, so you don't get that one bard in a dungeon that won't stand in dragon sight length to you.
The only thing that's similar to that for me right now as a dancer in Voidwalker, same as Voidwalker, but not Voidwalker.
The
Seagulls.
Flock of Birds.
Yes.
Oh, the Idol of Darkness, I think.
Idol of Darkness. Yeah, Idol of Darkness. Wow, nobody knows what that's called because dumb name.
Yeah.
During the ads part where you have the three that are moving around the arena, when I do my dance during that part, I have to run to the middle to make sure I catch both groups and then run back. And that's the only thing that's like that anymore.
I actually like that ad phase, which is maybe the only ad phase I can think of in recent memory. Like it's the most memorable part of that entire fight for me because I'm like, oh yeah, that ad phase is kind of fun and it kind of challenges everybody in a different way. But Zed, I just want to point out that I think what you said was so good though, because yes, you don't want there to be like a buff or something, just like Fusion, you were saying with the tether, right? You don't want there to be something that you can provide that like just depending on the whims of another player can completely goof for the entire party or whatever, right? But at the same time, the ranged DPS do have the most mobility out of any class. So the idea that like part of their actual gameplay would have to do with like moving to different places, and even with like machinists, I mean, maybe if there was something about like how you placed your robot, like your turret or things around the field.
That kind of
like
used to be a thing. Because you would be able to, you had two turrets, you had the rook and the bishop, and depending on which one was dropped, you could say, okay, do like regen or refresh.
Yep.
Was it regen or is it regain? It was regain. Because regain is TP. It was TP, I think, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, you drop it and it'd be kind of around the robot, and like, okay, yeah, like that was kind of cool. Granted, I love the Automaton Queen like infinitely more now.
Right.
It's a shame that we don't even have the bishop anymore. But yeah, it's changed a lot. Definitely for the better. You know, another thing that we're going to talk about too a little bit is just the idea of like the random procs on stuff. Sure. All the range jobs I think have suffered from this at one point or another. And that was my big thing.
To talk about.
That was my big thing coming into Shadowbringers was originally with Machinist, you had your 3 attacks, and then you could have heated versions of those, which the animations looked like way cooler, and they did a little more damage. But for those 3 base ones, like it was okay. You hit 1, hit 1 again. Oh, okay, it procced. Hit 2.
Yep.
Hit 1. That procced. Okay, hit 2. Okay, that procced. Hit 3. And it was frustrating. And so when they're like, all right, Dancer's the support class and it has random procs, and I was just like, get the hell out of here.
They're easier to manage though, because
basically that having been said, I have leveled Dancer, I have played Dancer, I do enjoy it. And I think in part just because it helps kind of mix up that monotony of like just playing one job. Like you have to play at least a couple different jobs to like not go insane, I feel like, in this game.
Yeah, well, so go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I'm glad you brought up the random procs, because when we were talking about, I mean, even the fact that the damage is lower to begin with, right? Some of that unpredictability, I don't mind random procs. I think they're fun. I like having to respond in the moment. So like from a player standpoint, I think it's kind of fun to have to like keep your mind active and sort of see what chains pop up and whatnot. Dancer, I think, does that really well. But where it gets a little bit weirder is like Bard, for example, because it can be so inconsistent to tell what Bard is going to be able to do in any given phase, right? Like there will be some times where our Bard in Static has a billion procs and it's like a huge burst of damage and it's so great. And then there will be another time where he has to literally say over comms, I did not get any procs, I need help with X. Like I need help with this, this ad. Or in like ENS and Shiva and things, it's been a whole nother thing with the ad phase with the damage that will just annihilate them, and then he's just dead. He's like, well, I hit that one electric and now I'm dead forever. Great, perfect. So like it's tough that I feel like they get almost punished with that. It's like it's more active, but at the same time, like when you're already pulling less numbers, it's even harder than to like anticipate what you're bringing to the table at any given moment.
As somebody that hasn't touched Bard since Heaven's Word, is there an ability that forces those procs?
No.
Okay, because I was just talking about Machinist and that stuff. Yeah. We could use ammo.
Yeah.
To kind of guarantee that, and so it's interesting that we don't see that with Bard.
Terrell Dean in chat's right. Imperial Arrow. Has the force proc.
Okay, so one proc. Yeah. Wow, one. That's generous of them.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice, and actually that it was still in Stormblood 2. When you hit a certain button, you could get this other thing, and I think prior to it was a higher possibility. No, during a certain song. If a certain song is up, when you hit a certain thing, you'll get this other thing. So it was like a third of the time you can guarantee it.
Yeah. And all of this is, like I said, hybrid tax or, like support tax. It's not a tax because you're not paying the part. You're not like improving something. You're literally just being punished because you could move faster. That's weird to me. Or you could, in games like WoW, you could tank. Well, I'm not right now. Why am I being taxed?
And kind of looking at it, like we've been saying with the damage, I think the damage could use a boost. But thinking about it now and talking about the random procs has kind of made me realize that. So you have, like we've already talked about how jobs used to be. You look at Machinist now; it's the selfish DPS, no random procs. You have Bard, still has random procs, but also has a little bit of support. Then you look at Dancer, has more random procs and more support. So I think in their mind, right, that's how they that's the tax, is the inclusion of those random procs.
I always think Bard as the toughest one because the random procs that you get are one thing. They're a single ability by themselves, chilling out on your bar. In Dancer, you have the 4 singles and then the 4 AoEs, right? You have them in a line together, a nice little set. And if this one goes off, this one could go off. And if this one goes off, this one could go off. So it's a cluster that you don't have to be like, oh, that one procced randomly. I wonder how long I haven't been paying attention to that. Whereas Dancer, you have your nice clean set where it's very obvious if it goes off.
And Level 39 nerd, real quick too in the
Yeah,
chat. Dancer gets flourish, so that's
Yeah.
also right. It's
Yep.
weird. Machinist had ammo,
Yeah, but
and
you also
do you have flourish on
flourish is
Dancer?
for two things. Flourish is
Yeah.
during your dance and between your dance to make sure you have feathers for your dance. That's
Right.
all
Yeah.
it's for.
Well, but it does. I mean, it forces a proc on everything, though, right? Like,
Yes.
Yeah,
so
it
you
lights your hot
immediately-
bar up. It's just like hit all of these.
Yeah, and it's almost continuous, and it's funny because when I've been playing Bard, and I still do, like I will still play Bard or Dancer. I like them both, but like when I've been playing Bard, I don't feel bad. But now that we're talking about Bard, I'm like, how have I not really felt this
You
impact?
didn't know you were
now?
abused.
Well, because yeah, like, and it is kind of, it's weird. Like, why don't they have something that will let you proc all that stuff? And then on top of that, the idea that like there are all these very specific things in both Dancer and Machinist that like allow you to kind of do X thing, Y thing, do this damage chain, proc this stuff. And then in Bard, we have these songs, but like in all honesty, the songs they're basically the same. There's one that's garbage that you only use between the other ones while they're on cooldown, and then you have the two other ones. And it's not like at any given point you're really like choosing a different song because of this thing. And even with the ability that seems really interesting, which is the ability to like when you have that song up, I don't remember what it's called, but like when you have your song that's playing, you can then get like an optional additional damage reduction buff kind of thing off of it, right? If you choose to pop that. But like even that barely never does anything. Like so it's very weird that like I feel as though Bard is kind of that transition between the two, and yet both of those two classes
Middle child
Yeah.
syndrome.
like both of those two classes have made up for all the things that Bard just hasn't had addressed. And I really am hoping that like maybe in the next expansion those songs get more of a role to play that sets them apart. There might be a different reason. You get a slightly different proc or something that just gives us, or, you can use Peloton freely or like whatever it is, because it does feel really weird and punishing in a way.
It's
That's the 1.0 Bard.
It's the astrologian change, right? You have all these cards, let's dumb it down. You have all these songs, we'll dumb them down. Like it's one of those things too, like, okay, I can appreciate trying to simplify things, but there are people that want that complication. So you have, I mean, it's again, like, the thing about like positionals, I'm not crazy about them, but some people love them, and there needs to be something there to take you from average player to like a high skilled player. There needs to be something there.
I love that's
better.
Bard is better. I was just gonna say, like, my favorite thing about classes is having to make decision calls. Like,
Yes.
I can follow a proc. I can follow a proc chain. I can hit a thing when it lights up. I can do that. Like, and it's some people love that. They love following that repetition. But my favorite, and why Astrologian was my favorite, why Bard initially, like in my mind, what it can be as one of my favorites, is a class that forces you in the heat of the moment to make decision calls about what you're going to do at any given second. And like in theory, both Astrologian, old Astrologian, and Bard have that, where you should be picking something different depending on a thing. But it has been, like you said, simplified so that it's easier to learn. It follows more of that pattern. But I don't know if I like that.
Right.
Yeah.
You feel like Bard now is better than it was in the last expansion, mostly because of the random procs. As chat's reminded us, now there are 2 things you can force on Bard, so that's nice.
Oh.
I at the start of this expansion of Shadowringers, I still played both. I have not touched Bard in ages, but initially I played both to see what was better for my static, especially in Titania. I did several runs on Bard and several runs on Dancer, and I personally was better at Dancer. Who knows why? And it seemed like it was more helpful to the party, so that's what I went with.
I'm a little tempted to go like level Bard now. I have the gear. I have all the aiming gear now at this point.
Right?
Might as
I
well,
keep
right?
meaning to go back just to see what it's like. But
Yeah.
then I'm like, never gonna remember to put dots up ever again. Dancer doesn't have dots.
I'll get on Bard. My flaming arrow hot bar with the little cross out will still be there. Be like, I remember.
I was going to say
Flaming Arrow.
Raging Strikes.
I'm scared to
it
look at my
doesn't
Bard
feel
hot bar.
bad. It doesn't feel bad. It just feels clunkier.
Less Bardy. It's
Yeah.
less Bardy than
Less
ever.
Bardy.
Right.
Yeah.
I did. I liked Shadowbringers because I got to run around again. But I was like, what is this song rotation stuff? Why aren't these buffs? I mean, they were buffs and are buffs still, but now again. But they're not the ones I wanted. They're not the like, I'm gonna be a mastermind behind the scenes and here's a card for you, like Astro. I really liked old cards on Astro. Here's a thing for you. Here's a thing for you. Miss it.
And the nice thing about Astro too back then, and I only dabbled in it a little bit when Heavensward came out, but the idea of like, you know, we talked a little bit about like dance partner stuff before, right?
Let's save Astro for healer.
That's a fair point.
Okay.
Let's do that. But first, we have some other things to talk about.
Sure.
So, Aldino, I feel like this is your time.
Oh no.
Here we go.
Oh no.
Tell us what you really think.
Casters are, I mean, honestly, in a good spot. You know, for bringing to a group. Like, if you are trying to raid, they're in a great spot. If you're trying to PvP, they're probably in a great spot. You know, like if you're just doing solo stuff or just pugging, in a good spot. Like, that's true. Casters are probably, I don't know that they're the most balanced. I mean, but they each have a reason why you would bring them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you bring the Black Mage because damage. You know what I mean? Like, they can do the most if they are really good. You bring a Summoner because they can do a lot of damage and they also raise. You know, like, that's there. You bring Red Mage because they raise, and oh my god, do they raise.
It's another scale in utility.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
Like with the Rangers. You have Black Mage and Machinist, you have Summoner and Bard, and then you have Dancer and Red Mage.
Yeah. And, like, structurally, that's working better with casters than it's working with range. Definitely. Yeah. I mean, just by looking at how many people play each, or, you know, magically looking at how many people play each that care about their damage, not say how. There's a lot of people playing all three, and, you know, like, no one really, there's not this perception that one of them is really that much worse than the other than maybe Red Mage not doing as much damage as the other ones, but really...
Yeah.
Does it, you know?
Well, and with Red Mage having the res,
yes,
there was an adjustment from Stormblood to Shadowbringers. And I have noticed, although, you know, Red Mages can still do some good consecutive resin, right? That does seem to have affected people bringing them to parties. That little bit of like additional restriction on that resing and punishment with the MP.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
It's weird because the range DPS utility is damage mostly. The caster DPS utility is raise, which I don't think is a good idea for raiding, because once you're past progression, you don't need a raise. So now you're being taxed for something you never will press. So that is my biggest problem with the casters that aren't Black Mage.
You know, well, and it's.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say, you know, earlier we talked about how, you know, there were mechanics just for Bard, right?
Yeah.
Eureka and Boja content is Red Mage
stuff,
right? Like, I feel like I've been slowly just kind of leveling up other stuff. And a few weeks ago, I finished my Red Mage because Boja's coming. and being able to take Red Mage into Eureka was great because you don't need to worry about anything. Everybody just goes on Red Mage. You can just raise people, like, whatever. Like, and that's the content that job was made for. And
I
you know,
tell you, it's suffering on any other caster, that's for sure. I don't want to play Summoner on anything that's not max level, or you know, like, you can sit still for a while. Like, if it's gonna die within a minute or so, I don't even want to do that. Like, you know, Black Mage is a little different because, you know, it's kind of on demand, but yeah, Red Mage is the every other content caster, basically.
Yeah.
Which is weird. It's a weird place to be, but somehow it feels better and it seems better than the Bard situation.
Yeah, that's
Random
a good
other
point.
thought. Dots on those as well. Like, Summoner obviously has dots. Bard, very obviously dots. Dancer, Red Mage, no dots.
Yeah, it's tough because I think that since the casters follow such a similar sort of evolution or format, again, like we were talking about with the ranged, like, then you do get into this problem, like this like dilemma where it's like the ranged might have the same sort of general progression, but doesn't have as much damage capability as like black mage slash, you know, summoner can. And then red mage, I honestly hadn't thought about it because when you do talk about a lot of these classes, you think a lot about, I mean, end game content, right?
Yeah.
And we've talked even in the past about how red mage does feel like it maybe doesn't quite have a super strong identity, especially coming out from like Stormblood into Shadowbringers. When red mage was first introduced to the game, I was like convinced it was going to be my new main. I was convinced. I was like, this is it. The rapier, I'm here to win it. This is going to be amazing. But even then, it did feel like the more I played it, the more I just like, even with its flair, even with stuff, it didn't feel as satisfying to me, like long term as some classes do. And yet, if I were given the choice to take black mage or red mage into like a dungeon, I would take red mage because I think red mage is more fun as far as just like moving between the fights and the mobs and things that are going to die quick. Whereas like with black mage, I spend 90% of the dungeon just being like, my Lillards! Like, and I'm just, you know, up in arms in the corner because I can't do anything because everything's getting pulled and disappearing.
This is my spot. This is where I will stand. If I need to move, I will return to this spot. This is where I live now. Meanwhile, red mage is zipping back and forth, and yeah.
But again, it's like it's a weird thing where that mobility or other parts of it. And it's funny because Summoner now is more mobile even than Red Mage, which I think is a crime because Red Mage should, I think, have the most mobility. But it's like, even with that, again, that mobility doesn't always have a consistent place to hold its ground with a lot of the casters. So yeah, it is kind of weird because I do think Red Mage is probably the weakest. But it's, I mean, compared to the others, you're right. The disparity doesn't seem as glaring, and you can absolutely do it. People rate on it and people use it all the time. Like, you can get good potencies. So I don't know.
I think it needs another buff, and not as in like potency for the job itself. Like, it needs a mage's ballad. It needs something it can give to somebody else. It has one, but so does Summoner. So
and you know what? I can tell you what that needs to be. Since we don't have the elemental wheel in this game, give it an end spell.
Yeah.
Right?
That'd be interesting.
Yeah, and you know, so that would how would that work in your mind? Like well, they have an M Bolden, but you would be like in arrow or something like that is what you're talking about.
Yeah, and fire or whatever. Just give them a yeah, and it just, you know, it probably wouldn't add anything to the weapon, right? But when they hit, maybe there's just like a little poof of flame or something, adds a little bit of extra damage or whatever. Like, and why do we have a red mage that doesn't have an end spell? Even if it's a magical DPS, it could give itself an end spell. Like, come on.
I mean,
I actually love that.
You're talking about spikes. You're talking about N got it for themselves.
Yeah, as in,
I was thinking spikes for some reason.
Casting fire on your sword and you do more, basically.
Yeah.
And I mean, Embolden is such a weird buff. It's so weird. I mean, it's great. You know, just if you're not familiar, it increases your own magic damage by 10%. That's very important. Your own. And everyone around you's physical damage by 10%. It goes down every 4 seconds by 20%. So eventually it goes back down to 0. So you want to do it and time it just right to do all your big stuff, you know, before it goes out like everything. But
I'm glad you included your own. So many bard buffs previously were like, here's a buff for everybody else. I don't get it. Screw me. But everyone else gets this buff.
And red mage is the opposite. This means only the red mage gets the magic damage dealt. So you're not buffing any magic damage. You're not buffing your healers. You're not buffing your paladin during that part. You're not buffing. And it's so weird. Why? Why is it your own?
It makes sense from a lore perspective, right? If you're a bard, you've heard your songs before. You're tired of them, but everybody else loves them.
Right.
That's true. I love that. That's good. Even if
I actually
wish it were different.
I almost want to say like they only get the magic buff because Square Enix knows that they're the only magic user in the party, like only magic DPS in the party.
Right. It's not like, going to be likely.
That's not nice. What if you have 2 casters?
Right. It's not going to be likely. I mean, it is likely. I think Ultimate was beaten with a black mage and a summoner.
Yep.
But that's because Black Mage and Summoner can do ridiculous amounts of damage, like just ridiculous if you know exactly what you're doing and your party helps to do that. Especially in the Black Mages.
So here's a question then, right? Because Embolden is magic on the Red Mage, physical for everybody else, right?
Yes.
What if they give us an end spell, but they swap that? So it's physical for the Red Mage and then magic for everyone else.
That could be cool.
So they use it during their
phases.
Stabby part.
Exactly.
Yeah, it would be maybe a little more situational, right?
Well,
but it would, or no.
Well, the thing is, magic. Yeah, the Red Mage melee is magic, so
Yeah.
it's not physical.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
maybe it could add a little like bonus physical damage.
I'm trying to think how to add the end stuff in here somewhere to have it make sense.
I still love I think it was our caster discussion, right?
Yeah.
So when we talked about this a little bit, but we didn't necessarily talk about the evolution of all the classes, which we'll kind of get into a little bit more too, because I have some questions about Summoner. But like with Red Mage, when we were sort of hypothesizing then, there was this discussion about possibly having your gauges and having disparities play some kind of role in a buff, like an additional option that you could do. Because right now you just get them both up and it's like, okay, fine. But I love the idea of like, if your Black Mage is higher by a certain threshold or something, or your Black Magic is higher by a certain threshold, maybe you get that like additional damage burning buff, the N that you can do. Or like maybe if your White Magic is higher, it can buff a healer, or it can, maybe a heal over time, like for short duration or something,
like
where like
mantra or something.
Yeah, where like there could be reasons where like tilting the scales one way or another during like a period of like like when your cooldown procs or something, like you could just have a reason to do that and then try to like get them back even again.
That would help differentiate it a little bit. I mean, because it's the same kind of concept as Black Mage, where it's like, okay, I'll cast some fire, I'll cast some ice. Okay, it's the same kind of back and forth with Red Mage. It'd be nice to mix that up a little bit more.
Every Jasmine in chat is saying, do like a dot or a hot, depending on the stacks. If you have more white mana, it's a regen. If you have more black, it's a dot. I think that would be cool.
I like that.
They have such like Red Mage is such like, I don't know, the lore around it is so good. The way that the class works, the ideas are great, but it's just it just didn't find its niche in in-game content. It found it everywhere else.
Yeah, and I think, again, this goes back to that idea of not having a support role. Because with Red Mage, like, you think about Red Mage from the series overall, like, and then you see what it is in 14, and it can do a little bit of damage, a little bit of healing. Yeah. But it feels like that bar needs to be lifted at least a little bit more in terms of capability. But they also have to balance it because it is a DPS. So
Yeah. Now, Albino, you've played Summoner for the whole game, right?
Yes. Since it has been here. Yep.
Yeah, you have witnessed everything. What was your journey? Because I mean, like, it has been a whole thing, right? And I know, like, even in Stormblood, people were using it and you could get massive damage, but it had the most insane rotation of all. Like, the stuff you had to do pre-pull was bonkers. Like, it was completely ridiculous. I took one look at it and I was like, nope, I'm gonna nope right out that. And then I never touched it again until Shadowbringers. So give us your journey through Summoner.
Sure. Well, so I started 2.0, like I played Warrior for a very short time, and then I started raiding, actually with both Monte and Zen in your group, right?
I don't think Monte was there yet.
No, I think it was, I think it was in the second group or something, and I just randomly went into Twintani as a summoner, and it was weird. But Summoner at the beginning, I really miss it a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that they added to it, but and a lot of it's fun. I mean, Bahamut, who can say no to Bahamut?
Right.
We're gonna say no to Bahamut later on for reasons, but that's fine. But like that original Summoner, especially when we could cast Thunder, oh boy, those days, those were heady days where you could you could have an extra dot. But like 2.0 was fine. I mean, it was still a little bit more complicated, but I don't think it was the most complicated at the time. I'm not entirely sure what job was. It may have been Monk back then.
Yeah.
I think it was Monk back then.
At least the learning curve for Monk. People going, I have to do what? How many times with this?
Yeah, exactly. Like what? And then, oh man, Heavensward was Bahamut. I do believe, right? No, Stormblood was Bahamut. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Heaven's Word was Dreadworm Trance, I do believe.
Yeah.
Have something called Bahamut, but don't get him.
Yeah. So you kind of channeled him a little bit. And Dreadworm Trance is a really cool, like idea, and it works pretty well, and it worked very well then. Kind of going into this trance, which is, like Final Fantasy IX heads, like that sounds great. And you know what? I don't really even remember much of a problem with Heavenward Summoner. It was complicated. It was, you have a strict timeline and you can't mess that up, or else you will
Was
cry.
it streamlined? I feel like
No,
it was.
absolutely not.
No? Okay.
I mean, it in
He
compared
just
to
made
now.
it seem streamlined.
Yeah, compared to now, because there's only one thing that you had to balance. Because I think the thing that to know about Summoner is all these things that got added are still here. Dreadworm Trance is still there. Bahamut's still there. Phoenix is still there. That's a lot, and that's why it seems so hard to start. But Heaven's Word, I had a lot of fun. I mean, the end of 1.0 or 1.0 2.0 sucked. The last coil of Bahamut sucked as a summoner because you had no MP, and if you raise, good luck. But that's just the way that it was. But Stormblood is where it gets really, really interesting and complicated, because once you can start summoning Bahamut and learning about how stupid pets are, I don't know. The pets are really dumb in this game. Really, really stupid. I don't think I have to tell anyone who plays Summoner that, and a little bit of Machinist. A little bit. That pet works a little bit better, but there were so many times where it's like, summon Bahamut, but then wait. Wait, what do you mean? But wait. But why wait? Oh, because when he comes out, he doesn't immediately react. Oh, so that means if I cast a spell, he'll just lose it? Yeah. Oh, so how long do I wait? 1.5 seconds-ish. Wait, what? Don't worry, you'll get used to the timing. That's Summoner. That really is Summoner constantly. I mean, that's really the way that it is, and it's easier now. One of the things about Summoner that you can see is that Summoners have the biggest theory crafting community. I think. I'm pretty sure. I don't want to say that definitively, but there's a large group, and they're the ones that you always hear. There's a 30-page document, on Summoner. Hey, you got to read this. Here's the primer. Hey, this is the stopgap primer before the, the patch comes out, before it changes everything, So Summoner is just wildly changing at all times. And I think that's part of the reason why I like and hate it, but like it more than I hate it. I don't know. We're talking about main journeys, and all the way through that, every single time I tried to play something else. 2.0, I played Dragoon for a while. And I was like, this is way more fun, but also it doesn't bring raise. So, I mean, maybe, and I can do more damage on Summoner, so I'll go back to it. Heaven's Word, I was like, well, Dragoon's even cooler now. No, I gotta, I go back to Summoner. Just, I don't know, maybe it's because I know it more, or I'm willing to deal with the craziness, and it's honestly not that bad. I do want to say that. It gets a worse rap. It is crazy, but you can learn it. It's just like Monk or Ninja, you can.
It's just that thing. You have a job that just kind of clicks with you, maybe even on a subconscious level. It's like that's my thing. And even with I've definitely been playing way more Machinist now, but every so often I'm like, I should go back and gear up my Dragoon a little bit, because it's Dragoon. Come on.
Yeah.
It's your baby.
There's so many eccentricities, and I can't even start talking about Summoner in a way that makes sense, other than to say that even now in Shadowbringers, this patch, it is still ridiculous to deal with the pets at all times. It's a job where if you, and this happens to me a lot in Shiva or something like that, I'm doing my opener and I'm doing things, and I've pressed these buttons, but the pet still has to do them. And so there's moments where it's the first bit of Shiva where you're it's behind or front, and you have to go towards one side or the other because she's going to do the whole go to one side or the other, right? Everything is timed exactly. This is one of the things that I like about Summoner. But right at that moment, I could be at 3 or 4 charges of Ruin 4 because my pet just hasn't done it yet. Done the thing that gives me the charge. So I'll sit there and go, okay, I have like a second. I hope it pops up now, because if I summon Bahamut, that pet's going to go away, and it won't do the ability that got me the stack. So it's like, okay, so I'll just wait. Okay, cool. So there's a lot of clunk. I don't like saying clunk, but there's a lot of these little, like you have to change gears, and, the gear shift is a little stuck, and the clutch, like sticks to the bottom. I've never driven a car, but this is what I've heard. Right? It's just, I don't know. But since we're talking about Summoner, then I will get on my soapbox and say, please separate it from Scholar, please.
But wait till the next expansion, because I still need to get that healer role quest in, and I plan to do that leveling Summoner. So if you can just hold off on that.
It's like, all you need to know about Summoner and Scholar, not going into a dissertation, is Summoners, when you summon your pet, it's instant and costs nothing. Scholar, it's a cast time, and why is that a different? Why did you do? Why? What? But they're the same spell. They're literally called the same thing.
Those two are so weird, and the fact that they haven't separated them at this point is actually baffling to me. The fact that they level together is baffling to me.
So weird.
Everything about it is bizarre, because it's not like Red Mage is technically white magic and black magic from like a lore standpoint, right? And you have studied both of them to learn the way of the Red Mage. So why don't all three of them level simultaneously?
It's like, look, if my white mage is at cap and my black mage isn't, shouldn't I get more of that white mana when I'm doing my...
It's very weird.
Yoshida right now is just like, oh my god.
It's weird that this one remnant of like a thing that it seems like they wanted to do at some point and then decided they didn't want to do, with like branching classes, or like classes that share this like fundamental root. Like they obviously have moved away from that. So it's very weird that they aren't separated. And it's also very weird that there are some like strange inconsistencies between the two, where like one can do one thing and then the other can't.
Look, all I'm saying is back in 1.0, everybody in the Arcanist Guild had these really weird like bagpipe looking things, and now they use books.
I'm not going to rant about how I hate books as a weapon, but that's okay. But and it hurts both classes, or both jobs. And it really does. Like, part of the problem with Scholar has always been they had access to these dots, like that they were the damage dealing healer, before Astrologian existed. And it wasn't because of anything they got. It was because of the stuff that they had, because Arcanist had, or because Summoner needed it in the future. Yeah. Why would you keep it? You gotta change it. Like, I don't know when or how or why.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah, it's very weird. I'm not sure why they haven't exactly changed that yet either. And especially too with like the boost potions, like even if you buy a boost, you get both classes unlocked. Yeah. Because they just unlock. So it's like, why are you even like? It's just very weird. All of that is so weird. And I'm sure we'll talk more about it too when we get into Scholar with healers. All of this to say, it's funny because I think like Red Mage, has maybe had some things that even now, like, because it's a newer class, we're all kind of looking at like, how is it going to develop? Summoner has obviously had a long journey and a whole bunch of things that have happened. And then there's Black Mage, which we haven't talked about like at all.
Because it only gets better.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, we start with, this is a very great rotation, and it gets a little bit more complicated, but it's still a rotation, and we added some spikes, but it's still the same freaking rotation.
It is amazing to me, like, watching the progression of Black Mage, like, because now I don't know what real problems they have other than having to do the mechanics, and that's the problem that we all have. Like, I don't know. I asked some people and they're like, it's pretty okay. I mean, you have to know the fight, but that's about it.
All they do is like get a little bit more complicated rotation, and then SE is like, oh, that seems hard. Here's something to move better so you don't actually have to move.
Yes.
Yeah. It's weird. Black Mage is one of those classes that I think definitely tests like your knowledge and strategy.
Yes.
Which is great. And I love that because yes, please give me classes again that do something different, right? Like, let me make decisions to, adjust in the best way. Or in the case of Black Mage, let me learn a fight so well that I know how to fit my kit into it. Like, this is a puzzle, and I love it. But it is like, as somebody who just leveled through all of Black Mage, trying to get a Morrow mount. This has been my project. Black Mage is just about everything that I don't like in casters, because I don't like not being able to move, and I don't like having to turret, and oh my gosh, it drove me crazy, because yes, the rotation is like, it builds, right?
Yeah.
So I think that Black Mage, out of all of them, from my outside perspective, it has been the most consistent across the board. It may not have like the biggest changes, the biggest, most ridiculous thing that you get. You don't get like a robot made of fire. Like it's not like anything really happens.
You're the robot made of fire.
Yeah, it's like you get a bigger explosion and you can move a little now. And it's like, great, fine, great. But power leveling it was so frustrating. Like, as I was trying to go through content, because at certain level breaks, you have like the same iteration of the same skills over and over and over. But you like, it's not like they just convert on the icon. So I kept like, oh, half my bar is gone again. Dang it. Which one of the fire ones, three, two fire. Do I have two fire now?
Is this an auction?
How many of these do I have, and which version of this rotation am I doing? Because like the spells are faintly, they're like similar but not, and some are open and some are not, and then sometimes you get this proc but sometimes you don't at certain breaks, right? But like getting it to the final portion, I felt like, this feels like a good natural evolution. And yet I do feel like out of all of the classes in Shadowbringers, they didn't really get that, like, wow. They and Red Mage didn't get like the wow thing, you know, where like
they didn't get their fiery robot.
Yeah, like they didn't get this ability or thing that visually, at least, or, you know, thematically, everybody was like, oh dang, like they can't, it's not like Meteor, it's not like, you know what I mean? So I'm curious, like it seems like it plays so well, but none of us really like main Black Mage, right? So I don't know how people feel about not having that big, like, satisfying.
You get that Shadowbringers job video, right? You get the Automaton Queen for the Machinist, you get the Phoenix for Summoner, and Black Mage is just like George Costanza laying there with like his ley lines, like, I still got these.
I honestly feel like the type of person who likes Black Mage does not necessarily care about all of that. They just want to rain fire down from the heavens, right?
Yeah. And I don't think that they don't need anything but bigger fire spells, really, you know, bigger ice spells, you know, like
your fire.
Or you know, meteor, things like that.
Ancient magic.
Yeah, ancient magic. Give us flood, you know, like better flood. don't give us freeze again, you know, because freeze is useful. I mean, it's more useful now. They even fixed that. They even fixed freeze. How do you fix freeze and still leave summoner with a physic that gives 400 MP back or HP back when you heal someone with physic? Like, what is happening?
Why do you have that?
Because Scholar.
Because
Arcanist has it.
Can I just take a second to say that physic is the most useless? I think it is the most useless ability in game, because at least I can still use sleep and Eureka sometimes when people overpull mobs. But physic, it's like, if you use this, literally you have wasted your time.
Literally wasted it. Like, if it was on Red Mage, you could cast it to then cast something else fast. Like, there's no use. But, like, to me, Black Mage with the original design, the fire and ice, such a great idea. It's amazing. So you build on that, and they just kept building on it, and they saw the problems, like, okay, it's hard to be mobile. Well, you have Swiftcast. Swiftcast wasn't enough, we'll give you Ethereal Manipulation. That wasn't enough, we'll give you the way to get back to your ley lines. That wasn't enough, we'll give you Triple Cast. Right? Like,
Pat mentioned Black Mage's finishers are instant now, so there's that.
Yeah. Like, there's nothing wrong. Like, I don't play it in Raid. But if I did, I don't think that I would have to change anything from the way that I play Summoner other than to teleport. That's it. Like, because Summoner has to learn the fight in the same way. You know, you're a turret for part of the rotation, and you have to time that right. You know, and you have a very rigid 2-minute cycle that you have to time right. I'm gonna say it. That's harder than playing a Black Mage. I'll raid on it in Shiva and see, but I'm gonna say that that's probably harder than having to do just one of the two. You know.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah, and Chad's brought this up a couple times too. Black Mage is Yoshida's main, so
Yes.
Yeah.
there's probably a reason that it feels
Yeah.
as good
And
as it does.
I don't want to be the mad summoner main because I'm not actually mad about it because that they're supposed to be a black mage and that's what they're supposed to do.
Mhm.
And I think that they knocked it out of the park with black mage so well that I want them to take those people and put them on some of the other jobs and go, hey, can you think of some ideas to make this as at least fully featured as black mage? Because it's not easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
not
because I
easy.
mean, even a couple of months ago, you were sitting here like you should probably nerf Summoner a little bit.
Yeah, just because the damage output that can be done, and they did nerf it a very little bit, and it's it's not even really. I mean, it's dots, which there could be a whole Summoner show because dots are just dumb. Like you hard cast them once every like 2 minutes nowadays. Like why what? So I could just hit try disaster. So it's like they keep for a lot of other classes they keep adding things and removing them, but I don't know if there was it feels like Black Mage had this planned the whole time. Or like they had a better reaction to the problems, and I don't know why. And I don't know how to get that for the other jobs. But Black Mage, like, man, if you like the cast and you want to play 14, you like Black Mage. Or Red Mage if you want a slightly easier time. I would never recommend Summoner, but like you have those too. I mean, it's the same way. You wouldn't really recommend Bard, right? I mean, you might.
I mean, I might.
I would honestly tell somebody to play all three and see which just clicks with them.
Right.
But
you wouldn't just say, oh, you like that, you should play this. Like, if you like a caster, you probably should play Black Mage.
And it's funny because, I mean, given the option, I would probably tell people I'd lean them more towards Dancer at this point. You know what I mean? If it came between Dancer and Bard. And like that's not to say that Bard like this whole discussion, it's crazy, and I'm sure we can talk about this more at the very end of everything too. But like right now, I do feel as though we are probably in the best balanced place we have ever been in. But there are still these little things, whether they're thematic or they are just these finesses, or it's like an evolution, or these things that are kind of there. And it'll be really interesting to see what they do going into our next expansion, because I feel like they could do very little and we would still be in a good place. But sometimes they do big changes, sometimes they do very small ones. So I don't know. The spellcasters feel pretty good, but there are these weird things. And you're right, like the tie between Summoner Scholar is super strange. Black Mage has been solid pretty much consistently, but like maybe it hasn't really overturned people's playstyles or surprised them maybe with the evolution. You're right, it feels very like strongly planned and cohesive, which is good. Because I think that Black Mages are strongly planned and cohesive.
Yes, it kind of makes sense.
I mean, when all you do is add another fire.
It's that idea again, right? Of for each of these roles, you kind of have I don't know as much about tank, right? But you have that one job that's like, if you want to be a range DPS, this is the range DPS. If you want to, have some other little things to play with, we have these other classes. If you want to be a melee DPS, if you want to just do damage, here's Samurai. Enjoy. It uses a katana, and you just hit things and do damage. And it's interesting. They have that, for each role, there's that kind of base, like this is a healer, this is a tank, this is whatever. And then they're like, okay, and then you get some other toys over here if you want to play around a little bit more.
So speaking of tanks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Monty's like, I'm still here.
No, that's all right. I'm not going to play too many different classes other than tanks for the most part.
Yeah, isn't that the way that it goes?
Yeah.
Which is
Probably
unfortunate.
for the most part.
Yeah.
I mean, there are others of our group of friends like, oh yeah, I'll tank, which, I might let them now more because since I have all my tank mounts, I don't really care. So
yeah.
I did start out in 2.0 as Paladin. Heavensward was still Paladin, but I was in most of a hiatus, so I didn't really raid a whole lot in that one. And then was Stormblood, right? Yeah, Stormblood was Warrior because I came back to Static and they had a Paladin. So I was on Warrior. And then Shadowbringers, I switched to Dark Knight and then flipped it back over to. I think no, into Shadowbringers, I was on Dark Knight. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because I switched for some reason. I think it's for Blackest Night because that is so amazing. But yeah. Tank wise, I mean, Paladins really seems to be about the tanks now. All of the tanks are moderately good. Your Paladins and Gunbreaker, their ultimates are kind of the same, but then kind of not. I mean, obviously, Gunbreaker, you're pretty much killing yourself. Or you have that moment where you're almost dead, you hit Bull-Eyed, and before you hit Bull-Eyed, but your white mage benedictions you, and then you hit Bull-Eyed, and you're back down to 1 HP, and then everybody has a panic attack.
I see Rook's face.
Oh,
And
yes.
then,
It happens many times.
and then so there's those, and then Warrior and Dark Knight, they have their ish ones. I mean, they both kind of like Warrior just kind of sit at 1 HP, which you can move now, which is a good addition instead of just chaining yourself to them. So whenever it's active, you can walk around. But they're kind of essentially the same class anymore, minus the Blackest Night, because there's someone in chat a little bit, but the Warrior and Dark Knight basically have internal relief or whatever it's called now, where you basically just spam one move over and over again. And then so, I mean, obviously you have your different little gimmicks with each class, but essentially they play the same. And Gunbreaker is the most active. I mean, it's just always like something to keep going and going and going and going and going. Seems more have like a DPS rotation than some of the others. Like, well, I know I have to do this and yada yada yada, get from point A to point B from straight ABC. And then Gunbreaker is like A, B, B1, B2, B3, and then C1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. But looking back on how they've changed, I actually had a video of the Ifrit fight from E3 before 2.0 came to kind of look at like some of their abilities. They don't have any. Like some of the quality of life changes, like they didn't have a tank stance at level 30. I guess you didn't get it until you got your job quest, and having a Marauder or a Gladiator.
Yeah, you're trying to go through like Cutter's Cry, and maybe you haven't done all your quests yet. And Cutter's Cry is when it was originally like content. That's not necessarily an easy dungeon, right? And you don't have anything to grab hate.
Yeah, that's one of like the learning breaks for tanks. Like anytime I see a Sprout tank and I'm going in there with them, and we get Cutter's Cry, and I'm like, "Is this your first time?" And they're like, "Yeah." I'm like, "All right, buckle in. I'm gonna help you."
Imagine it being worse.
Yeah.
I literally cannot comprehend not having a tank stance in that dungeon. It is designed for aggro control. Like you are supposed to wrangle handling multiple mobs to aggro that. Like, how would you not have a stance during that?
Even in the not Sastasha. What's the next one? Tamtara? Yes. Tamtara.
Tamtara, yeah.
You don't have, as a paladin at least, you don't have an AoE. I think the only tank at that level that had the AoE was Warrior.
Yeah.
There are group pulls there. How do you get everything?
That was
it used to be so hard.
Paladin not having any sort of AoE aggro generation. Like I started playing Paladin back in Stormblood, so I came to tanking pretty late because I did not want to do it and I did not like it. So I came to it late. I have had my own emotional journey with tanking now, and I'm there and I'm on board, and I actually really like Gunbreaker. You heard it here. I actually really like the procs, but it drove me crazy that like as a paladin, everybody else could do stuff to like get groups, and then I'm over in the corner like I just have to flash powder them over and over. I don't have any other ability for this. Like, why is this?
Oh, man, it used to be like flash twice, hit everything at least once, and then make sure you're on the one that the DPS are on, because the DPS aren't going to pay attention to what you're on.
Yes.
I think I'm always tab targeting. Even now, I'm always tab targeting and cycling through, mob generation to see who's coming up on stuff. I mean, now it doesn't really matter. I
Yeah.
think it's more just ingrained in my brain of, constantly
Yeah.
looking at somebody's.
You never know. They might take that wonderful hate
Right.
generation away from you, or do
Yeah.
something to the DPS to make it so that it's not as effective anymore. They do that kind of stuff. So just
Yeah.
keep that habit.
Yeah, I definitely think that some of those changes coming into Shadowbringers were good. Like, this is what's tough, right? Because again, like we've talked about this, each class you want to have something that makes them feel like I am playing this and not this.
Mhm.
And yet there were some weird discrepancies in some of the tanks where it was like, well, if I have to do this foundational thing in this party, I need at least the same basic tools. So like actually getting some of those things brought on board, especially for like Paladin and different classes where everybody had a little bit of the same kit, on one hand made it a little bit nicer, especially if you're learning one versus the other early on, but it also kind of did make it feel like I think we lost a little bit of identity. And like Warrior, I think, is really struggling in that boat.
Yeah.
Because like again, the whole inner release idea is so good, but I don't really know if like it feels as though you really are unleashing some kind of berserker, like inner chaos, like creature, right? I just don't know if it feels like that when you play it. Paladin, on the other hand, its spell casting always felt real question mark. What is I guess I cast spells now. But like with Shadowbringers, I did feel as though that spell casting component with some of the stuff they added and changed, it feels more cohesive. It feels more like, yes, now I do my spell thing and I've got all this stuff to make it easier and faster. And like, I liked that change. But I mean, yeah, Gunbreaker does feel as though it's far more dynamic than a lot of the others, and it has more just character to the way you play it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Paladin definitely has some good flow with, using Requiesce and then using your casting abilities now and then finishing off, then going back into your melee rotation. And it also helps line it up for like if you're raiding, and you have to be away from the boss. And if you're be able to do that, you can still put in some damage, right? The one thing I hated most about tanking was stance dancing. Like, you turn on your stance, then you build hate, but then you turn it back off so you can do more. And then on Warrior, you don't even turn it on, and you just hit Eternal Release and you just hammer the crap out of everything in your path. And that was a good feel for Warrior, because you just straight rage everything and you just beat the living snot out of it. And now it's just kind of like, I mean, I'm glad that you don't have to stance anymore, because now you just really shirk everybody when you need to. But that's a good.
It seems like a lot of people actually miss that though. So that might be like just a personal play style thing.
Yeah.
I miss the idea of it. I did not take very much after Heavensward, but I don't know, it seems like if it had been done more cohesively, stance dancing would have been pretty good. For certain jobs, it was just a pain in the ass. Like, oh well, I got rid of my one stance, and now everything I just did over there is kind of useless. But at least I needed it for this part of the fight. Yay!
Yeah, to me it feels like astrologian. Like they were like, that's kind of annoying. Like you got to think about your cards. You know what? Let's just remove it. Let's just get rid of it. Let's just make it so that you just press the button.
Well, I do have to argue that a little bit.
Right.
Because earlier, I don't think it was just that this is something that's like hard or that like complicates the class in a way that we want to streamline. I think it created an opportunity for disaster.
Right.
And that disaster opportunity was wholly because of the community's mindset again. Like we were talking about earlier, that idea of raw DPS always being the god of everything you're striving for, right? Which it is not, and it's so silly. Like there's so many other ways you can be valuable to a party and really ensure success for everyone, not just your own parse, And I saw it time and time again. A tank that read somewhere that if you wanted to optimize your DPS, you should never use tank stance. And you'd have a black mage who was like just destroying everything. And this tank would refuse to switch, like in dungeons or in whatever. And they keep yelling at the black mage to, shift the aggro. And the black mage is like, buddy, I done did it every single time off cooldown. But you just have to tank them. Like if you can't maintain the aggro, you have to do the job that you have in this run. Like, and that job is tanking. And it was constantly this thing. And then people would get upset because you're infringing on their parse and what they need to do. But like, it's tough because we'll get into this too with cleric stance with healers.
Oh yeah.
Because on one hand, I did love cleric stance dancing. And I thought that was always something that was fun, especially coming from WoW, where healers got actively yelled at if you, in most but not all content, if you tried to DPS while you healed. Right? So that was fun to me to be able to try and do that and optimize and have more things to do at once. But at the same time, it also goofed all the time. Sometimes you go out of content and then it disappears and you're like, oops, well, oh God. Or it's still on because it didn't come off because it didn't trigger when you hit it because of a server delay. Or even now, even with the one tank stance you have to put on, you go between content, it's off, you didn't even realize, and you're like, oh, well, okay, great. Well, so streamlining it makes sense, but at the same time, I wish they had done something in tank rotations or in rotations to still give you something dynamic and fun that you can kind of interact with. But I do agree that as far as aggro generation goes, like players are too unreliable in a sense and prioritize things in a way that doesn't always conducively work towards a party goal, that it is tough to punish a party for somebody who just refuses to do a thing that will ensure they fulfill their role, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, as a tank, I am under the belief that, DPS shouldn't have to hold back. They go, balls to the wall 100% of the time. If I can't hold hate, that's on me. That's not their fault if they're pulling hate from me. That's something that I should compensate to, not let them die. But, I don't know.
Right. And yeah, I didn't think about it in the same way as cleric stance. But you have made an MMO. MMOs have existed for so long. You know how the community thinks. You know that damage is the most important thing, even if it isn't. Help us. Help ourselves. You know what I mean? Like, what are you doing? Why would you even think that was going to work? It's not even that big of a deal. It's not on the level of the fatigue system, right? Yeah. Like, that is that is completely the opposite of all MMOs at all times.
If you thought fellowships were bad.
Yeah.
Oh, the fatigue system really was
that is legitimately why I stopped playing 1.0. As soon as I saw the video of them saying, hey, this is how it works and it will help people catch up, I was like, you have no idea what you're doing. I quit. Like, period. I'm not playing this anymore. It's not on that level. They've gotten so much better. Yeah. But like, what is that disconnect? Like, because when you take the stance away, you take that tool that was there for people to stand apart. So you got to put one back in.
I think
just something. I don't know
why. They did this. They took the stance dancing away. They made it 5,000% easier to get hate because people don't want to play a tank if they're not good at it. And we needed tanks. We needed people who are willing to play tanks. And it's honestly a shame because for the people who do really like to play tanks, are good at it, it made it kind of a snore fest. But that's my opinion on why they would do it. Just because we needed people to play tanks.
I think from the perspective of somebody that is always playing DPS, right? I think there's that anxiety or that worry that with tanking and with healing, like, you have a job to do. If you don't do that job, you cannot complete whatever content you're in. If you're a DPS and you're kind of the other DPS or the other or the tank or the healer can help make up for that, right? If you don't know your rotation and you're just hitting one all the time, it can still work out. If you're on a healer or a tank and you're not keeping hate or you're not healing, everybody's gonna die. So there's that that pressure I think that comes with that. Like I got Gunbreaker to 80 I don't know, a month or two ago. And I remember just running like one dungeon, and I like somebody pulled hate and I didn't notice, and they're like, "Oh my god, Vogue." And I felt like the worst player in the world because of it. So I think there's definitely that kind of anxiety or worry about it
that you can do if you have that anxiety when you go into a dungeon. You're like, "Hey, I'm new to this. I don't necessarily know what I'm doing. If you notice something that I can do better, please tell me." And then people won't be afraid to speak up and tell you, and won't be sitting there the whole time going, "Oh, this guy sucks. Why is he so bad?" They'll be like, "Oh, right, they're new. I need to tell them."
See,
what to do.
but I'm on the thought line of like, I hope I'm good enough. I don't want to mess up. I don't want them to know that I'm new.
Yeah.
Like, I want to just
Get rid of, become humble, my friend. Humble yourself.
You have to drop it and go. But at the same time, your party can help you too. And like, that's the thing, right? Like, whenever I'm taking new tanks through stuff, I'll always say to the party, if you have one guy on you, don't just stand there letting this thing hit you in the middle of nowhere. Like, come run up to the tank, because they do have a lot of like aggro and AoE generation.
Especially with enmity, that's like a group thing. Like, yes, the tank is supposed to maintain that and everything, but like everybody's got, abilities that will, decrease enmity and all this kind of like work together. That's, yes, the priority of handling that is on the tank, but you can do things too.
Somebody in chat earlier was mentioning that particular situation. You're alone. You're out in the corner by yourself. Something is murdering you, and you're running away because for some reason you think running away from the mob is going to help. No, go to the tank and be like, "This is no."
Run right up to the tank. This thing's picking on me. Can you deal with it? And
how again you can all work together towards a goal, as opposed to like trying to point fingers at one person or refuse to adjust what you're doing because of XYZ, right?
Even if the tank doesn't at any point realize what's going on, if you put that mob next to them, they're probably AoE generating hate. There's a
fair chance they'll just hit it anyway, even if they don't necessarily notice that it's happening. And for some people too, and I think for people like me that do DPS and that are trying tank stuff out, right? There's that little thing on the side, right, that shows all the mobs and the enmity and stuff, and
however,
you never notice that as much as maybe you should. Okay,
there was a cap on that.
Yeah,
that's true. That is true.
Last poll on when that new dungeon we got, right? Where it spawns the mob. I forget the name of it too. Where it keeps spawning the mobs because they're summoning and break them open. I do all that mostly in one poll, and there is not enough lists there to spawn everything. I think I have everything, and most of the time I do, but sometimes it's like, "Oh, this person's getting hit. I don't have everything."
Right.
Yeah. One thing that I'm curious about, right? So coming into Shadowbringers, obviously we lost the tank stances, which was one way that people would use to delineate main tank, off tank. And when they started talking about tanks coming into Shadowbringers, there was this discussion about each tank getting abilities that would allow them to almost support the efforts of the main tank when they were off tanking. And I remember at the time, like, this is before they really went into all the details. It was like a little offhanded line that I think I interpreted this way, right? At the time, I was like, "Oh, that's cool. Oh, I like that. Like, what if you have something, like, what if they've retooled the fights so that, like, in the content where you have, like, the two tanks, like, some of the hits might be so strong that, like, you have to use this thing to help them defensively, or, like, you have this thing that supports or, like, reinforces what they're doing." And I feel like we saw a little bit of them trying to rework how they sort of have that main tank off tank relationship in Shadowbringers. We even have a few mechanics like in the current raid, the Idol of Darkness, where like you may, depending on what you get targeted with, have to both share that beam or like there are things where like obviously as through most of the raids, you do have to work together as main tank, off tank. But I was really curious if they were going to like really strengthen that role so that you didn't feel as though as an off tank you were just DPSing as a tank, except for when you needed to swap.
And remember, Square Enix was curious about that too, because up until at least the Paris Fan Fest, they still didn't know if they were making that distinction. Talking about like, oh, you're getting another tank because we're not sure how to balance the healers, but also we don't know what the hell we're doing with tanks, but we're getting a new tank. Like,
So
okay.
I feel like they kind of added it a little, not like a lot, but at least two of the tanks have an ability where it's like a shield or a regen that you can put on someone else. And that someone else could be the main tank.
Does it ever work that way, Monty?
For what?
For any of those, like, you know, like
do you ever put your regen on Yukari, for example?
No.
Yeah.
It's,
I mean,
it's that DPS mentality of I shouldn't have to target somebody else. I should.
Most of the time, I have that macroed in if I'm going to use it, so I know.
Yep.
I mean, I really think that the dot on Gunbreaker or the heal is so minimal. Like, you know, both our healers like 2 heals, and they're like all of what that would do.
Black seems to be the most well broken, but also the most actual. Like, I can remember many times, like especially with some of the mechanics that they've put in this tier, where like you just cannot rescue somebody. Like, oh my God, Shiva, why can I not rescue somebody that's been stunned?
Yes.
Why do I even have rescue if I can't rescue the boys that got stunned into safety? Like, I don't understand it. But I have seen cases where like Blackest Night or, you know, things kind of like that actually will save somebody's life before a mechanic that you have to have them alive for. So there's
my favorite
that.
thing about Blackest Night is in dungeons, hearing my buddies here be like, "Oh, it didn't break."
Yeah.
Because the stuff in dungeons aren't strong enough to break it.
Yeah.
Like when we're running Amdapor and I would hit Blackest Night on myself, it would dispel before the boss could break it. And it was like, come on, I'm like trying to break this. And then Blackest Night is one of the things that I do have macroed to the tank or whoever I'm else with. And I've actually thought about re-going back to Dark Knight just because I enjoy playing it. But I've been waiting for a weapon, which that's not happened yet either. So,
everything but what we need.
Yeah, right.
We've gotten 2 dancer chakrams now.
Yeah. So we got a dance weapon and we got a white mage cane. Yeah. So we're ahead of a normal curve, right?
Usually we just get like ninja daggers, like 3 sets of those.
Yeah. And there was a comment that Twilight Fall made of people that constantly spam provoke. And it's like, you know, I've been trained from use provoke in emergency. Something's out there, you provoke it, you know, just, you know, it's there for basically only when you need it. And now, I mean, I see a lot of pug tanks, they just constantly provoke, which, I mean, they've changed provoke a little bit apparently, but it's still, plus I think other mentalities of like, you provoke a lot in WoW, and other games, I think you just constantly provoke. And so I think some of that, some people coming over from those games, like, oh, I've got provoke, I always have to provoke, right? So it's not like, it's more kind of a learning that how it is.
Tips.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, especially in 11, that was a big thing as they, you know, was mentioned in the chat. I mean, gosh, I never did tanking in 11, but I can remember like papers written about the different types of enmity, because it wasn't just enmity. There was different types of enmity, and this is what this, you know, provoked worked on this one, and it's just, it's crazy.
I do have one question, unless then would you like to?
No, go ahead.
Okay, Living Dead. Everybody keeps talking about Superbolide giving healers just a heart attack. I don't care about Superbolide. Whatever. Your health drops down. It's fine. I can heal you. Your ability is not going to inherently kill you. Living Dead, has it changed at all since it was released? Is it the same as it was when Dark Knight was introduced to the game? I honestly don't know, which is why I'm asking.
I think it's still the same. But the best thing to do is when you play chicken with your white mage and optimize your uptime on your Living Dead to make sure that you get healed in those last 2 seconds of Living Dead, so that you have multiple, you know, stuff.
I hate it.
Yeah.
I hate it. stupidest ability. It's like it's so funny because on one hand, I totally get it's the longest. Look, we'll go rational on this, right? It's the longest of all of the like, oh crap, tank buttons. It can sustain through massive amounts of damage and be a huge asset. I hate the way that it like bizarrely puts so much responsibility on everybody else to finesse around this ability. And as a white mage who for most of this tier had to babysit a Dark Knight through it just like every single time I was like, makes me so mad. I hate that you have to have a macro to tell me 1 second before you want me to hit you with Benny so you can optimize your up and all this stuff. Like, it just drove me nuts because then you're like basing your whole place out, your cast times, your everything around waiting to Benny the Dark Knight. And it's like, it just, oh my gosh. It's one of those abilities that I feel like is weirdly punishing in a way that I would love to see changed in the future. Because like none of the other ones are as punishing as that. And even with Gunbreaker taking you down to like very low health, as long as somebody gets a heal on you, you are fine by the time that comes off. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to like sit on this thing. Plus the fact that sometimes Living Dead, if like your healer is healing, like you've got your co-healer or whatever who's not responsible for healing, and they're out in the middle of nowhere and they're doing AoE heals because there's been some sort of damage, and it just ticks you high enough that Living Dead will murder you. Like every time. I cannot stand how it functions. And it's so weird to me. Like, I don't know why that's one thing that hasn't changed when so much else about the tanks has become more convenient.
Yeah, there was a strat for Titania from the tether that you had to do in the extreme version that a Dark Knight could potentially take all the tethers with using Living. Didn't like it.
Oh, jeez.
But it was a pain. And I've actually only been killed by Bolide once because I accidentally hit Bolide when Garuda, Ifrit, or Raptopasca, whatever one of those three, did their AoE, and it fat fingered right when it did it because it drops you and then it gives you the invuln, like that split second. So with server ticks, I just straight died.
So an accident murder.
Yeah. I was using a little site called gamerescape.com. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I think I've heard of that.
To go to the wiki to see, the changes over time in Living Dead. No, just formatting. That's it. No changes since it was first added to the game. I don't really see anything. They did make it more readable. That's about it.
That's good. People there are plenty of people out there who probably don't have the same vendetta that I do against Living Dead.
It is,
but
I'm pretty sure a lot of them do.
Yeah. I think you poll healers, and I would guess over 50% easily.
Well, and it's so tough because it really is the only, like, here's the thing, and I've witnessed this over and over and over again. Titania is a perfect example. I call her Titania because in Shakespeare that's how we always said it when I was doing
it.
Say
Titania also.
But the problem is that in Warframe she's Titania because she's named after the planet, and every time it kills.
Yep.
So Titania, that was a big strat that a lot of pugs used. But there were also a lot of people coming in for the first time to play because they wanted to, go through the content. And there were a lot of healers who just didn't know. They just don't know that that's how Living Dead works. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's the only one that does behave like that. And there was so much chaos because people would heal too soon, you die. People healed too late, you're dead. People heal and every time, I would watch parties wipe and wipe and wipe. And I'd be going, what's going wrong with this? Like, if I wasn't doing healing myself, I was like, what is going wrong with this? And finally it started dawning on me, oh my gosh, it's when we have Dark Knights in the party. And so I started saying to people in chat, you have to time it because do you know how Living Dead works? And people had no idea because especially coming off of Stormblood, when Dark Knight was the black sheep of all the tanks that nobody played because Warrior had DPS for days and Paladin had so much defensive stuff and also could do some really strong DPS. Nobody knew, or they forgot, or they just didn't realize. So it's very weird to have this one ability that is so dependent, especially at a crucial moment, on you having somebody in the party that knows how that functions, who does not play that class, and then who also has something to respond to it, right? Like having that Benny that you just save because you see the Dark Knight and you know that's how this goes, right? Or whatever it is. It's such a weird thing. And like I don't know. I don't know. I have a lot of feelings about it, obviously.
It's such a hidden mechanic, you know? Like it just nothing tells you this at all anywhere for a healer. For other things, like, okay, home gang, kind of self-explanatory.
Yeah.
You know, like most of the other ultimates are just like, okay, they don't die. I don't know. Like I don't know. But this one, they don't die, and then they die, and no one understands why. Like
They should just
to
expand
me,
the tooltip for it.
yeah.
You know,
To me,
explain the ability, and then say, you know, please make a macro to, you know, apologize to your healer. Will also automatically give commendation to healer that caps you off.
That saves you.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
funny because I do think it's one of those abilities that, like, and this might just be like a vast sweeping statement, right? That like somebody who's tanking as a Dark Knight might love because it does present these really unique opportunities, or like just slightly better opportunities, but somebody who is responding to it will find very annoying. And like none of the other abilities really do that for me. I know a lot of people hate Superbolide. Maybe it's because I've been on White Mage this tier as opposed to Astrologian back in Stormblood. But I have so much in my kit as a White Mage that Superbolide does not phase me in the least. I'm like, I can Tetra you. I can even just hit you within a size. You're going to be fine. I can use a Lily on you. Calm down. You don't need my Benny. I'll use it on that DPS who ran into the AoE. Like, it just, it's one of those things where it doesn't phase me. But Living Dead has been a unique challenge for me this tier, and I've seen a lot of other people grapple with it who just weren't as familiar.
Yeah.
So
It's definitely something.
when we saw the initial tooltips at the media tour for all the tanks, and everyone was like, "Oh no, every tank is exactly the same now. Holy shit!" I do think that they did make the basics of each class very uniform in a way that we don't see in the other jobs. Again, that's probably the whole we need tanks, let's make it simple. I personally, as somebody who doesn't play tank a lot, kind of like that because I can go from one tank to the next and be like, this is the same as, okay, I know how to play this job. But I do feel like they still have those other half of the abilities where it does still give them an identity. And I don't know, Monte, as somebody who plays all of the tanks, what do you think about that? Do you think they still keep their personal identities with that uniformity?
Not really a whole lot. I mean, I think each. I mean, me personally, I mean, I think each tank has a niche that somebody wants, right? You know, Paladin because they have Hollow Ground. That's it, right? You know,
Healing.
Gunbreaker has Bolide, and you know, each one has their own little thing. But I feel that most of the tanks are really similar, right?
Okay, so you think that uniformity is overwhelming?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're pretty much mostly the same, minus what buttons you're pushing and you know which way you're going with it. I mean, I feel like Gunbreaker is the most interactive, you know, just from going through your charges. You know, like I said earlier, Dark Knight and Warrior, they feel the same when I leveled them. And then Paladin, I haven't been on too much, but it's still kind of Paladin with Requiesce changing a little bit. But you also have to think is that we're getting more and more new players into the game, and they have to make tanks more attractive to them. So I really think in any MMO that you have the people like me that play a tank in every single MMO pretty much. Because that's just something that you do. Like, you know, from a healer standpoint, if
your
you're a
friends don't
healer
want
in
to.
one. Yeah, if you're a healer in one game or one MMO, most of the time you're a healer in a lot of them, right? And so they're trying to make this easier for people to try and pick up, which it is definitely easy to keep hate on a tank now. As long as you have your stance on, they're pretty much almost glued to you for the whole duration.
Your shining beacon of anger causing ability.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like with the tanks, sort of our earlier discussion about fights almost and or what like is in the game, the content in the game, sort of molding in this like weird reverse way the actual classes that we get or changes that we get to the classes.
Mm-hmm.
Like takes over time getting to this point where they are fairly uniform, they can all fundamentally do the same thing, does feel like it was very much a direct response to that, right? Like initially with Dark Knight, I feel like it was intended to be, right, like the magical damage reduction class. Like you were all about sort of like the stuff with magic and how you could sort of reduce that. But then we got to this point where it wasn't like the stuff in the game actually really, really, really needed a magic specific tank that like, you know, would really be dealing with that magical element.
Yeah.
Paladin has that strong defensive bend to it, where, I mean, you have that idea of the holy warrior, right? But even in 14's lore, paladins are a little bit different. They're closer to knights almost initially, because you're supposed to be like working in service of this thing, and that magical bend does get introduced, but it gets introduced a little bit later, and it was clunky for a long time until we got some recent changes. So like the idea that you are a magical tank that could feasibly heal or have this like strong defensive or party sort of defensive, helpful kind of thing is in there. But again, we got into the DPS issue. So then it's like, okay, well, if they can't heal good enough, or that's not really necessary, they got to do DPS. And then like Warrior, which should be the DPS tank and was and kind of reigned as like the big fell cleave monster of Stormblood, then ran into this issue of like players just playing for that damage. And so like all of these kind of conundrums led to the point where it was like, well, what should a tank do? They should tank. Great. So if we're not going to create content that specifically caters to each of these, because we don't want players to feel like they have to swap tanks for each thing, or they have to have like a shoehorn, and there's only 2 of these in the party, or 1, depending on what content you're doing, then they all need to be able to do the same thing. But it is kind of tough because I do feel like we sacrifice, especially for players who are tank mains, then some of the fun variety of playing different tanks.
Yeah.
Like there's stuff that they're good at, and at a given time you're probably going to lean towards one that might be more meta or slightly better for a fight. But it's not like you pick up a new tank and you're like, oh wow, yeah, this is so different. Oh man, I love the way that they realize, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And
So
really,
do you
I think sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, to add to that, I mean, I think that they also made them more similar to get rid of the meta of raid groups. I mean, meta wise, you still want a paladin, pretty much for certain, right? Because all ground, you want that extra mitigation when you need it. But everybody pretty much always took a warrior, because they could fell cleave the crap out of everything, right? And then now, I think with more cohesiveness, I mean, damage wise, I think the last I looked, there's still only like maybe 100 DPS, give or take, in both directions between them, played optimally? Question mark. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it helped to get rid of oh well, we have to have a paladin and we have to have a warrior. Well, I like playing Dark Knight, so kind of help get rid of that stuff.
So do you think this is just a shot in the dark, tinfoil hat, if you will. Do you think they evened all the tanks out, since they weren't sure? They talked about the main tank off tank thing, right? They weren't sure how to do it. Maybe they evened them all out in this expansion as like a halfway point. So in the next expansion, we actually get that main tank off tank switch thing. Do you think that could be a possibility?
I'd really like to see what they do with tanks to change them in the next expansion, because I really hope they add back into some of that more to define the class, to make it more stand out a little more.
So at this point, we just have to kind of cross our fingers and hope that this was a step along the way to them
right
dividing
breaking
them
it
more
down
evenly.
Kind of clumping it up, and then hopefully through the expansion pull it, or the next expansion kind of differentiate them some more.
Yeah.
Cross your fingers and your toes.
I think that I don't know that WoW showed anyone the way, but when they released Monk Tank, right, with that stagger mechanic, and then they brought Ignore Pain, which is basically just a way to turn your resource into extra health for yourself, basically give yourself a shield, self-shielding tank, was Warrior. They now have, they do some damage, but they have a shield and they have this Ignore Pain. And monks have this stagger, which the way that it works is you take damage, but a part of it gets taken away and given to you as a dot. Yeah. So like you take a chunk of the damage up front, but then some of it is staggered. That's why it's called stagger. And then you have abilities to clear the stagger, or like increase the amount you convert in the stagger. Like those two, that is them looking for ways to make tanks different, but still the same. And it didn't really work all that. I mean, it did work well, but monks were kind of overtuned like always. I don't know if it's changed now. But like that's what we need. We need some of that. Maybe not to the same way, but like paladins have a shield, obviously, right? Do more shield stuff, I guess. Come on, like why not? Warrior's supposed to do damage. They could ignore pain. Just saying,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Wasn't that an ability way back then?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. It was something like that, and I'm like, yeah, that's cool. Make it more of their mechanic, Like I don't know. Like there are ways to go, but I think you were saying they want it to be simple, so I don't want to say that they're afraid to do it, but they haven't figured out how to do it yet. So
I think it's also like DPS is that it should be simple enough that an average casual player can pick it up and play it decently well, and then there should be a skill gap for if you want to raid on it, you want to be first NAEU raider, gunbreaker, whatever, right? But there should be like something that people can achieve to go for, instead of I'm just like 1, 2, 3.
I like this outfit better. All right, this is the tank I'm playing.
Yeah, totally agree.
So healers.
Yeah.
Yes. Hello. Hello, everybody.
They all have different outfits.
I remember back in the day when healers had Protect and Shell.
Yes.
Those very, very Final Fantasy-like things.
Yes.
Yeah, they don't.
I'm sad they're gone.
Yeah.
I feel like it wouldn't
feels
hurt for
weird.
them to still be here.
I get why they got rid of them, but it feels weird.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
It is a little strange. I started out as a healer in Heavensward and played through on White Mage through all the way up through up to Stormblood, and then swapped over to Ast, and then swapped back to White Mage for Shadowbringers like partway through, and have been doing that since. Hold on, I got a siren going by.
Right when it's your turn too, I love that. It's like, oh, they're talking about healers now. Okay, great.
Save that video editing so you don't have to worry about it. So yeah, like I didn't really get into Scholar until recently, so I can't always speak to that one. But between Astrologian and White Mage, it's pretty wild to me how Bard came up to us earlier as being one that has been through some pretty radical changes. But both Astrologian and White Mage have really been through the ringer as far as changes go and the way that they work. I mean, I can even remember back when I was doing White Mage and Heavensward, how punishing mana was then versus now. Like, it was unbelievable. You were the slowest healer. It took you the longest to cast stuff. It used the most resources. And you had to just constantly on cooldown use anything that you possibly could to get that mana back. And it always was fun because it kind of felt like playing with fire a little bit. Like, will I have enough mana? I don't know. We'll see. And that was kind of fun in its own way. And terrible.
Still had to use ethers at that point. Yes. I know that was like the constant thing that the healers were using at that point.
Yeah, it was.
I don't know if they still do. I don't hear about it anymore. That's for sure.
It was pretty tough. And then Astrologian at release was a nightmare from what I hear. I didn't pick it up until after I think some of the very initial changes had been done. But at release, wasn't it? It was just disastrously balanced. Yeah. Nobody played like it was a complete mess.
It was fun. It was still fun in the way that it was up until Shadowbringers. but it was kind of useless next to
Yeah.
the other two healers. Like it didn't have the potency, it didn't have the range. It really just didn't add up to being either of the other two. And it was kind of like, well, you're cool, you do damage, you add extra damage to people sometimes. That's you can sit in the corner, you're not helping.
Mhm.
And Scholar was literally a DPS monster between cleric
Mhm.
stance and all the other stuff going on with the Heavensward raids. So that was a whole thing. And then it was pretty interesting, I think, just witnessing Astrologian change because and we all, I think, at least Zen and I have our feelings and thoughts on this, but the cards with Astrologian are probably one of the most recent changes, and the lilies with White Mage. Like, both of those were pretty huge things. The cards with Astrologian, in theory, I loved how they worked originally. Right? Talking about diversity of options and being able to choose, in theory, like, I have a newbie tank who's really taking too much damage and doesn't know how to time their cooldowns. You know what? I'm gonna bowl them. This person died, they have no mana. I'm gonna give them a Ewer. This, like, in theory, I love that. And I loved like setting them up, spreading them, using one boost, like having those decisions that you could make got me engaged with the class in a way that oh my gosh, I loved it. Because again, the idea of like what separates a class that you've just picked up and can play well enough to just do a thing and a class that you just have learned so well that you can use it in a way that is so flexible and fluid and natural. And like for me, that was Astrologian. And I could do it in raids. I could do it in anything. I could talk while I was playing it. It just didn't even matter to me because I got to the point where it was so reflexive, and I loved that. And then Shadowbringers, and then Shadowbringers. And the thing is that like I can't honestly say, and like Zen, you can like get in on this. I can't honestly say that Astrologian is broken or it doesn't play well or it doesn't function because that's just not the case. It plays. Yeah. People love it. It functions, probably more consistently useful as far as endgame goes. Like all those things I totally get, but
fun.
Yeah, I just don't like it the same way.
It's not fun in the way the old cards were. And I personally haven't been keeping up with it. I've been playing White Mage like you. So I don't know if the cards are actually better. I assume because people aren't complaining about it, they like having the more consistent damage output. But it was nice to every now and then somebody dies. We don't have a bard this run. Whatever. Here's a Ewer, buddy. You know, if it came up, it was definitely more random, but it was also more intuitive. A card would come up, and your brain was immediately like, "This goes here." Whereas with this one, it's like, I need a different symbol. Change it. Okay, cool. Did I miss a heal? I did. That's how I feel. I mean, perhaps with more practice, it would become much more intuitive. But I did not give it the amount of time to the point where it was comfortable to do that. It felt to me much clunkier.
Yeah, it's definitely, you can get fluid with it, right? I mean, even learning the original Ast cards, you had to teach yourself, to recognize the symbols. But then I do agree that you can tell that it was a system made to be different because the fact that the cards have different symbols, but now they also have this seal on them, it's like, why even have the different cards anymore? Why does it not just proc as one or the, like, this is the
because
seal.
lore.
And this is, but you can tell that, like, just like tarot cards, they were supposed to originally have different things that made them visually recognizable to you. So my brain really did have a problem because I had learned, like, this is the star and it does this crit thing because it's sparkling, and here's the tree, like a sturdy oak, it protects my tank. Like, that was fun to me. But now it's like, dang it, tree is like, went on a tank. That's melee. The seal. Okay, put it over here.
It doesn't mean anything. I'm gonna look at my little. Oh, it's purple. All right, cool. That's what. Yeah.
And it's like you can set it up easily because, like, depending on what you get, you can convert it into a card, so you can tell immediately whether or not it is melee or ranged, right? Like, you can set it up so you can see it, but it's weird visually because if they had made the system from the get-go like that, we wouldn't even have the different icons on the cards. It would just be seals that pop, right? Like.
Right, that would be easier.
Yeah.
Sockdraws in chat says that as an Astro main, they feel like the new system is much more consistent. So there's a little confirmation for us there. But they I guess they don't like they don't think that having the random cards come up is very helpful in an RNG situation already. But I guess maybe I personally kind of wasn't bothered by that because I did play Bard for so long, and it was just RNG 100% of the time, all day, every day.
And condition.
So,
well, plus
yeah.
you could flip cards and all sorts of stuff, right? Like, so
Yeah.
there were ways. Of course, there were cards that were useless. Like, oh, what was the yellow one?
Spire.
Yeah, useless. Like, well, you can burn it for other
Burn
stuff.
Burn it for AoE.
I don't even remember what it does or what it did.
It boosted
TP.
regen.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Like, so
We don't
yeah.
have that anymore.
Yeah.
We didn't even address that. We don't have
Yeah.
TP anymore.
There's no more
Right.
TP. Yeah, it's gone. Whoops. Yeah, so that was something. And I do agree that I think consistency-wise, gameplay-wise, it, as far as how the players were using it and how the cards were balanced, right? Like, if Bowl had been a more significant reduction, possibly it would have been more useful. Like, there's all these different things where, like, I think they just got tired of having to individually balance all the cards. People use them for damage anyway. They were like, let's just streamline this. It makes it easier for people to play and get into.
Weird and interesting to me is part of the reason they added these other things in, probably part of the reason that they had these different things in the first system is because they didn't want the damage buff on Astro to be overpowered. And then in the new iteration, they were like, JK, everything's damage, whatever. So it makes you wonder across the other classes, like, we have all of this theory crafting about why they limit damage in certain places. Is that actually real? Because you definitely just took this other job and were like, screw it, everything's damage on that job.
Yes, and then when you look at it, we're talking about trade-offs or sacrifices with classes, right? Astrologian, although it is more finicky, like, you absolutely have to learn more how to do this, but its damage can be just as on par, really pretty, it can do some good numbers if you're using everything, and you're also boosting the party, and you're also healing at the same potency, and your shields are considerable enough that you can justify not bringing a scholar, and it can do heal over time. Like, it's tough because I do think at this point, Astrologian feels like one of the classes they want the healers just like the tanks to all be viable because they are a foundational role. But at the same time, Astro feels like it should be penalized in some way because of the stuff that it can do that can nullify other classes. Like, and White Mage has held its own, but like, poor Scholar's still good. You can absolutely play it. It does have good stuff that it brings to the table. None of that is like negated, right? But like, Scholar really had shields and fairy. And with some of the changes, with some of the changes and things, it doesn't even necessarily have that damage niche anymore. So it's like,
no.
It did overtime. But they did give it a couple extra things. Like, it has that crit buff. It has the thing where they can automatically have all of their shields be crits. So that's a little extra fun. What is XCOG? XCOG is amazing. I love that ability. It should have
been the Bowl card. I was going to say this earlier. Excogitation should have been what Bowl is. It is seeing into the future and healing you, right? then the Bowl card would have been cool. You put it on a tank, and then you don't, oh, hey, it went off. Cool. Like, I know why Scholar has it. I do. And it's really cool. I love it. But that, to me, sounds like something that's more like tarot cards, seeing the future. You know, I don't know. I love the ability.
Overtime Scholar has definitely been given some really rockin' abilities, and they needed them too, because initially they didn't have crap. Their heals were awful, and if you were not aware of the fight you were about to do, didn't have the shields up at the right time, or didn't have the bubble down at the right time, like, you were screwed. You weren't helpful, and it wasn't even necessarily your fault. You have to learn the fight at some point.
Yeah,
so that's how I always felt about Scholar.
An important note.
It's the looking to the future healer. That it was difficult when you were learning. It's not my preferred play style of healing at all. And hats off to people who play Scholar well, quite honestly, because
well, it's funny because I knew a lot of black mages who also played Scholar because they liked that there were like ways you could game system to get like crit lows. It was all about that strategy and planning and like trying to figure out how you were going to plot that so that you could literally just nullify everything. Like all these things that you could do. And I mean, I haven't played Scholar much this expansion, so I can't talk about it that much, but it doesn't feel like it's the same at this point, especially with them they took away one of the dots. They took away some of the damage or possibility in it.
But you can eat your fairy like a lollipop.
I mean, that's good.
Wow.
I don't even know if that's useful. I'm sure it is. People do it,
eats their fairy all the time.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. I mean, I know they do it at least once in the fight, or every once in a while.
Yeah.
But also, another thing I like about the new card system is how many times with the old card system did we have to wait to pull on a raid for our, astrologer to flip a balance card, sit there and wait and wait and wait and wait just to get that optimal card range so we can pull.
Oh, can you imagine doing that ahead of the Shiva fight, which is like 15 minutes long?
Oh.
You get
yeah, that would be a disaster. It would be I totally agree. But what also drives me crazy is that you can't. So we got that, which is good, right? Like, yes, you can you obviously can just streamline straight into that as far as rating goes. But you can't play cards on people outside of combat anymore.
Yes, it drives me insane.
And
especially if you have not, if you're not the one, you know exactly what I'm going to say. If you haven't engaged an actual like hitting the boss, hitting the mob or whatever, even if you've like healed somebody, you might not be engaged in the fight. It doesn't count if you put the card on them after a heal. You have to have engaged in the actual fight. What is this?
And you lose your seal, and you lose it because what I loved about old Astrologian was that I never had to stop doing something. Like, that's what I loved. When we were running between mobs or between bosses or between whatever, I was flipping cards. I was strategizing. I was like, oh yeah, I know we've got this big pull coming up. I'm going to put this in there. I'm going to get ready as we round the corner. I'm going to hit him with that. I'm going to go I loved being able to do that. And it's so like, it's this extra weird hiccup. Like if they even just took it so that, you can just play cards on people outside of combat now. Like I would just love that, because even with the seals, I can start getting into that flow again. But so many times when I was learning it, I wouldn't be in combat, or the tank just wouldn't have hit or something. And like, I'd put a card on and I'm like, where is the seal that I just lined up?
Yep. It's lost. And all the abilities I had ready, just screw them. Ugh.
Screw them. Gone.
Bad.
Bye-bye.
It's bad.
Like, yeah. But neutral sect is great. So there's that. So, I mean, that's good. But I do have to take a second to talk about the disaster that was White Mage Lilies at release.
Oh yeah.
Yes. That needs to happen.
Because we talked about the job gauges being a thing that got cosmetically introduced to the game, that then they felt the need to introduce some kind of mechanic for. And I think out of all the classes, not a one of them was as absolutely nonsensical as the White Mage Lilies at release. And this is part of what drove me to swap to Astrologian like full time. With, I guess it was the release of Stormblood, or it was in Stormblood, yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was like the absolute opposite of what you do when you play White Mage at higher levels. Because initially, and you're going to have to help me remember this because I tried to wipe it from my memory. Initially, didn't you have to use like one of your slow single target heals? Like you had to use one of them to proc one of the lilies or something. And then like you could consume, it was so backwards. You could consume all of the lilies to put the shield Benison on, which would have no effect whatsoever scaling wise, whether you used one lily or 3 lilies, and it would automatically use however many lilies that you had. You could then put a shield on, and you got no return for using more or less. Then we had the whole, I recognize them, I lose the names, and I recognize them by where I have them keybound at this point, but the buff that makes your healing potency do more using certain abilities. It's like a prayer, or it's you tag everybody with a confession. Thank you.
Oh yeah, confession. Yeah.
I'm like,
Because it didn't make any sense.
Yes.
5.
Confession. Oh
So
my god.
confession stacks would then proc on party members, but they had the shortest, like they just would vanish. So like you're healing the most you're healing, which would then put confession stacks on, but then they would vanish before you actually needed to heal anybody again, thus nullifying the entire point of the confession stacks. Like
Yeah.
it was such a mess. And I was just going like, why are you doing this? Like everybody knows you play white mage. You don't want to use those big, heavy cost, slow cast heals. Like you want to use whatever you have that's instantaneous, like Tetra and Asides. Like
You're free.
yes, and free. And then you're consuming these lilies because you think in your mind, you're like, I should be trying to get these stacks. I should be trying to use these lilies because this seems to be the momentum of the class that's been built. But it actually hurts you and it doesn't help. And it doesn't matter how many you use or have or don't have. So like eventually I just stopped even looking at the lilies and I just didn't even pay attention to them because they didn't matter and they made no difference. So like it's so much better in Shadowbringers. It's so fun. I have really fallen in love with White Mage again. Is like the end of this whole journey because even though it's still a very straightforward class, it feels powerful and nothing feels as good as firing off that blood lily and having our black mage, a sharply dressed man, go, "Oh my god, you just got the hardest hit of the fight," and I'm like, like
I mean,
it's so good.
it's to the point where I think our white mage in that ad phase just erases that first stone. Yeah, just erases it. Like the first ad has a stone skin that it will cast eventually. So you have to interrupt it unless you nuke it from orbit as a white mage. And I mean, you know, from time to time, I think it's Monte and I actually who have to go over and hit it like twice, 3 times. Like I think we hit it 3 times.
Doing my dances. It's like, oh, I just hit everything and everything.
I mean, on anything, you see that thing casted in like stone skin, you're like, not today.
No. Yeah, it's great because I think, you know, our white mage I mean, she absolutely hates it when it's not up or she had to use it or something weird happened or, you know, like something crazy. But when she gets to press that button, I can hear the maniacal laughter.
It always feels so good when you're able to get like timing on something in a fight, like just right.
Yes, it's just so satisfying and it feels good. Like being able to sort of time out those lilies and know when you're going to be able, like, I don't have to use this heal. I can focus on this. I can do that. I can do this on the move. Like it really, I think, has addressed so many of the things for so long with White Mage, from its mobility to now we just don't even worry about mana. And honestly, I think they could, like, Thin Air is so difficult for me because I don't want them to pry it out of my hands. So help me. But at the same time, I do feel really bad that like we have this just freebie and both of the other healers don't, which is very weird.
And you almost don't need it because so much of what you have now is absolutely free and hard hitting.
Free
as far as heals.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's free. It's off the global cooldown. It's instantaneous. Like it's ridiculous. So do we really need Thin Air? Probably not. But all of that's so good.
I still want it.
I don't want you to take it from me though, but is it maybe unnecessary? Yes.
I find myself because I don't heal raid, I just heal dungeons. I find myself in dungeons being like, I wish people would take more damage so that it would prompt me to use the lilies more, so I would get my blood lily more often.
Yeah.
I do find like I'm just healing, or I'm not healing because it's a dungeon. I'm like, here's a Medica, time to do some damage. And then I look up and I have 3 lilies just chilling there. I'm like, I could have turned that into hurt and pain. Why haven't I used these?
That's where overhealing becomes your best friend. I overheal with
I feel guilty
now. I mean, yeah, but like all of White Mage is overhealing at this point. To be completely honest, like you use a size on cooldown, doesn't matter if you need it or not. Maybe you hold it a little bit for something, but like you still go for it. I use those lilies on people who've barely taken any damage all the time because I want that blood lily for the AoE. Like it's just, it feels really good to play right now. But I also think that it hasn't like completely nullified the other healers per se. Even if it could take, I think it could take some nerfs and still be fine, right? Like, it's interesting and it's been fun. trying to think. Oh, and the wings are fun. Those are good too, because again, like when we were getting into Stormblood, we got the gauge, but we didn't really get a whole bunch else. And I remember being so disappointed when everybody else got these like sparkly abilities. And I was like, well, I did some stones, I see. And there's lilies, but they don't seem to do much. And that was like the whole feedback. And then we got pretty much everything that I think white mages have been wanting in Shadowbringers. To be able to like hit hard and heal hard. Even if you are a little bit less mobile, or you just have a less interesting rotation, to get wingies, because everybody was like, yeah, give us some sort of thing where we get wings, like in the dungeon when you pop that palm in what is it, the angelic elf from Dead. Palm of
I don't know.
Palm of something. But everybody was like, why not give white mages something like that where they can go to a special stance or something. So those were all good changes, and it brought me back to white mage, which I was excited about.
Like the healers are just shoving you around. Like, this one's bad right now. Go this way. This one's bad right now.
Yeah.
So we gotta talk about cleric stance. We gotta specifically.
Yes.
Cleric stance.
I definitely I used it because you should back in the day. But I like you were talking about earlier, I would click it and it wouldn't get clicked, and I'm trying to heal somebody and it's not going off, and I'm like, why are they dying? Oh my god. Look down. Hell, hit the button again. And at this point in time, they're very, very close to dead, and it's just like
I will never forget being at E3. I forget which year it was. It was the year they had the Leviathan fight. So it was a weird hybrid fight because it wasn't extreme, but the railings did drop.
Yeah.
And I can remember playing as some kind of healer, because this is, not a lot of people were playing 14 at that. It was still ramping up a little bit. And I'm like, I kind of know healing. We need healers. I will play a healer. Okay. Halfway through the fight, one of the staffers comes over. Hey, you have cleric stance on. Oh, wasn't on the hotbar. So I don't know when somebody had enabled it, but I'm just thinking somebody probably was like just planning like this long con, massive troll for this healer, and just turned it on and then took it off the hotbar.
Oh man.
that's the worst thing I've ever heard.
It was terrible. It was terrible. Yeah.
Yeah.
They had a really bad win rate on that the first day.
Yeah.
Oh man. Cleric stance to me, it feels like one of the I don't know, one of the biggest pins to pop the scholar bubble. Just because of the way that dot classes work. In other games, in some other games, they don't snapshot as they do here. So basically, when you have all your buffs up and you cast your dot, it'll stay at that level the whole time that it's up, which is why you try and put them on under those. Cleric stance was the force multiplier for Scholar, and now it's gone, and you have nothing. And like removing that reduces their damage by so much, because that's why they had so much. Because you can move, you could have your dot up, you could heal, you have your dot up, right? But they didn't give it back to them in any way, and it's just weird to me. I don't understand, because it affects everyone. Like White Mage has dots, Astrologian has dots, Scholar had 2 of them, right? Like all of us, it's all of a sudden gone, and now they only have 1, so who knows? But yeah, like Cleric stance, I remember hearing all the Scholars just so upset.
Yeah. It's an easy fix. Just give them a new move. We'll call it bookmark, and that'll let you.
That's cute.
That is actually kind of cute, though.
Yeah. I was trying to, books. What can we do? Turn to this page in order to crit your dot or something. There you go. Done.
That is
you're
more
putting your
work
healing
than
on
the
hold.
bookmark.
Here's the bookmark. And then you just hit people with it.
I mean, okay.
Book swaps are a thing.
That's a good point, though, because I think that a lot of the other healers have had a lot of stuff added to them, or like changed and enhanced about their sort of fundamental mechanics and how they work. Whereas Scholar has really had I think, I could be wrong, but I think more taken away from them than they've actually had given to them that's new. It seems like. And even if some of those things were
That seems
universal losses, like cleric stance, it is a little bit strange to me. I mean, I can understand the idea. Here again, we get this whole argument about like healers.
Yeah.
Should they only heal? Which
Mhm.
in Final Fantasy XIV, I feel pretty confident saying no.
Yeah.
But it's, people have different opinions on it. And the idea of having a healer that is more DPS oriented than the others and isn't just providing support it's actually contributing its own numbers. I'm sure that they've kept back from because they don't necessarily want it to become the meta again, right? But we see that same design mentality in basically every other category. Like we were talking about, like machinist is the damage, but no other, and so it's weird to me because in theory, Scholar originally was supposed to be, it seems like, the shield healer. But again, because Astrologian does what it does well enough that it can make the difference with its shields, Scholar has kind of lost out on that, What else makes Scholar really strong? Well, we've got the passive fairy heal, we've got X-Hide, we've got these other things, sure. But it's not like you need to have one. It's not like there's something that sets it apart. And it's not like their own personal damage contribution with dots and things like that would be enough that it would make them compensate. It's just interesting. I don't know what else they could really do other than doing synergies, which they also don't want to do, right? Where like the mega fairy you can get now boosts everybody's healing, kind of like Phoenix, or I don't know. It seems like it's in a weird place for Scholar right now. Not bad, but just not like excelling in anything.
Personally feel like it's kind of an even exchange for Scholar. I feel like they did take a lot of that DPS away, but they gave it a number of really solid healing abilities. So I think it's kind of even. And you can tell me if this has ever happened to you, Rook, but I know our healer in Heavensward, our white mage in Heavensward, would get very frustrated with our Scholar because they did not help at all at sometimes. Like when she needed it, when she asked for it, and they were like, I'm too busy, here's some damage. Has this happened to you?
Yes, but I might be a terrible human because to me, I was like, I have all these heals that I overheal on all the time with white. So it was like the perfect compliment. You know what I mean?
Right.
Okay.
Like, oh, well, yeah,
So
you
didn't mind so much.
I guess it's tough now. I mean, Blood Lily again is not really something that takes much time out of my casts or anything, right?
Yeah.
It's I don't know.
It could have been a time and place thing. It was when Scholar was the heavy hitter. So like, even an extra heal sometimes
DPS
from
greed
that
is real.
Scholar.
Yes.
Yeah, would have been.
DPS greed is a real thing, and it does happen. And yes, I definitely had moments where it was more like, oh, I don't feel like we're sharing this evenly. But usually when I was able to adjust, I was like, oh, that's fine. As long as everybody knows that I'm the one that's mostly healing us, then that's fine with me.
Yeah,
Unless people are dying, and then it's not fine anymore.
Yeah.
Not fine. Yeah, then it's not okay.
Yeah, that
Your
is.
DPS is so good until you're dead, and so are we.
I mean, that's the problem with the way that groups are made in general in MMOs. More healing doesn't help you. More enmity doesn't help you. You already have it. More DPS only ever helps, period. Unless you're trying unless you're doing something like from long ago that you might burn through a phase and then die horribly because you killed it too quickly. And like that lends to the mindset of everybody has to do more DPS because it's the only thing that actually helps because the rest is wasted. It's like I don't know how to fix that one, right? I
think
don't know.
a lot of these issues, the kind of big broad sense. I mean, especially from somebody that played 11 for a million years. The way that fights are made in 14 are that it's what you need to do is very specific. You need to do this for these, mechanics. In 14 or in 11, I can remember going up to Sky farming Kirin, and we would just kite it around for 4 hours because that's whatever. Like you could, cheese it and do whatever you wanted and still come out, victorious against it. But in 14, you need to do this, you need to do this, and you need to do this. And there really isn't that room for like experimentation with mechanics and with, you know, abilities, you know, talking about like astrologian and stuff, where, you know, all these abilities are really situational, but there's not a lot of situations given necessarily where you even have the option of situational tools.
Right.
So, you know, I don't know that that's something that they'll ever be able to change with the way that the game is right now, and, you know, considering how far along we are in it right now. But yeah, I think
they could re-add that with, like we were talking about it earlier, those specific mechanics for different players. It makes the fight a little bit more like, uh-oh, is this going to go wrong? Makes the fight more uh-oh. But that's what we're kind of looking for, right? That hairline situation, like, could it be bad? Oh no, I'm watching. Here's my very specific ability. Okay.
You want to have... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, you know what? You go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, you want those moments of glory, right? You want those moments where you go, I have the exact thing for this, and this will save the world. Like, raising. I hate it as a summoner. I hate it. I don't look at your HP. I don't look at my HP. The only reason I know someone's dead is if someone goes, uh-oh. Right? And I'm serious. Right? If I don't hear that, I don't raise. So if I don't raise, it's not because I'm not going to. It's because I don't know. I'm not looking at you. But it's like, that's my moment of glory, though. Because, you know, we were doing like remove last week, and it's like, oh, both the healers died. They died at the same time. And I'm like,
and you're like, all right, let me grab my superhero cape here. Right. I got this.
Right. It's, you want to have it. It feels good. You know, like, you got to have those moments of glory. You have to have those lilies that'll blow up that ad, that'll help, you know, like, you got to have those things. And some classes just don't have enough.
Yeah.
I don't.
It is a balance. And it's a trade, right? Because on one hand, if you have a lot of stuff that is kind of reflexive or situational or like those sorts of things, sure, then there are times where we get into these problems of, well, you have to bring X class to do this thing. People might be gated out. People might not know other classes. Or, you know, you get this mentality around, you know, DPS and all the stuff that we were talking about there, where, you know, you're kind of trying to give multiple options to a class, but maybe they are failing in their anchor point, like healing and tanking, because they're so focused on doing this thing that they're going to be focused on doing, right? So by making it a little more uniform, by taking away some options, you do make it so that the fights and things can be more fine-tuned, more precise. You can go in and you can get in there with the party and you can make it happen no matter what you like playing or don't like playing, which I really appreciate, because I think that 14's fights are so fun. Like, I love having that extremely technical, strategic fight that you're planning and you're, you know, getting together. But I think we do sometimes lose that element of surprise or that hero moment, like you were saying, where a class could shine because you chose that class. And there have been times where they like push it a little bit, like Shinryu X, the phase where the healers have to heal the ads. I love that, because that is an example of a mechanic that is not DPS specific to push you through a phase, right? So like, you have to have something else to use to get through it. Or, you know, other things like we talked about in Rathalos, like having a phase of a boss where it's not about the raw damage that you do that then pushes him to a point to fall. It's about how many consecutive rapid fire strikes you get on him, which is really a neat way to say, like, hey, even on like Astrologian, oh my gosh, when you could use light speed and you're just like ding, 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 and then he falls out and you're like, I helped. And it feels really good, you know? Or like you're that bard and you're like, I don't have to stop for days. And you just go in and then he falls. Like, that's awesome. And I'd love to see them not be afraid to do a little more of that, right? Like, have those moments where a certain type of class could shine. Because when it comes down to it, especially in end game, maybe more so than the rest of the game, players are likely to have played different classes. They're likely to have different things in their kit depending on meta, or, you know, whatever it is that they just are feeling, or, you know, what they need for their static or whatever it is. So like, give us a reason to maybe let some of those other classes shine where we can. Because I do think you can still make it even, but still have classes that are unique. I don't envy them the challenge, but I think you can do it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's so many abilities that you're like, oh, when would anyone ever use that? I mean, you can ask probably any caster, like Adel, you press it. You know, like, it helps the healers. Give me more of those things. I loved Mana Shift when it was a thing. That's why I thought of it, because yeah, hey, I see that mana is a problem for other healers. Hey, I'll give you some. There you go. I'll pop Lucid on myself and get it back. I loved that. That was really cool.
And I, in turn, liked noticing when he did that and popping refresh.
Right, exactly.
Yes. Yeah, or even if there were
Line it all
mechanics that, like, you know, you need to have, like, this person in the party needs to have a shield, not just because of the damage they're going to take, but because of something in the fight. Like, you need to have, like, a shield, or the boss's theme, or just creating these opportunities where, like, we can answer them in ways other than just raw DPS. Gosh, even using something like rescue or sleep, or having to systematically choose, like, we have to sleep this ad, we need to get this ad out, we need to do, like, having something where you're actually having to come up with a strategy to sort of deal with, or CC, or whatever it is, that makes more use of those kits. Because when we talk about abilities that are useless in a game, it's typically because there's just nothing in the game that uses them.
Yes.
It's right. It's really interesting. We keep talking about this, and
They gave it
several
back to us.
several times today I've thought, why do we still have sleep?
Yeah.
Like, right?
Astro didn't. I talked about this before. Astro didn't have sleep, and when I did the healing quest, and they were like, "Sleep this," I was like, "But I'm an Astro. I have sleep now as an Astro.
Yeah.
Why did you give that back to them if they don't need it?"
And what are we using it for? Like, mechanically, nothing. Like,
It would have been cool on the Shiva ad phase, but
yes, like, you have to, you can only sleep one of them as opposed to having to stun it or something. Terrell says Eureka, which is true. Early on in Eureka, when people would overplay mobs, or like one would be chasing me, I would sleep. But again, we don't usually see ads in dungeons that are on the level of difficulty or punishment of, like, Eureka mobs, which, give it to me. I'd be so down. Like, I used to, and I still, you know, when Fluid Aura had the knockback, right? And I would be running with Sprouts, and a tank would get overwhelmed because somebody accidentally pulled too much or whatever. I would Fluid Aura an ad out and sleep them away from the party so that nobody could hit it.
There you go.
Like, doing those things also gives you choices and options, but we just haven't seen. They decided not to cater the content that way, and thus we've lost a lot of those abilities.
And
but
it's interesting too, because I mean, you don't want to necessarily have those fights where you need this job, right? But then you do have, especially like Eureka, because Eureka, like, yeah, some of the NMs might have some mechanics, right? But it's nothing like super crazy. And I think Eureka is, thinking about it, it really is more like 11 than I think people may have originally thought, just because of the way that the battles are handled. Sleep does come in handy, you know, all these other things that aren't a specific mechanic in all these other, you know, in trials and raids, you can kind of use them here and make them work. And that's, you know, that's kind of nice to be able to break away from that mold of, okay, you need to take this tether over here, you need to go stand in this thing. It's, oh, those guys are over there, could you like sleep them or something? I have that ability, I can do that. Like, so it's nice to have that, and I'm really curious to see how Boja is gonna be when that comes out, just because of that idea.
Yeah, you know, the only place that I can think of having to strategize who's gonna do what is Shiva's ad phase, because you've been split into two groups, and now you don't have as many as you normally would. So now it's really the 4 people who are stuck there. You have to stop these ads from getting in the middle. You also have to kill them.
Couldn't
you know,
slow
this
them.
one,
Couldn't bind them.
and
You could
these
only stun
reflect
and
damage.
interact.
You know, and so these reflect damage. So as you know, like as a summoner, I'm like, okay, cool, that's cool. I can't blow them up because I will die, so I'll blow those up. Or, you know, this thing's gonna live long. That's the only one I'll put my dots on. Giving you those reasons to think about and to do your rotation in a different way. I mean, it screws me completely. I hate that part for the rest of the fight. Oh my goodness, does that suck? But thankfully, there's a 25-minute cutscene right after every time, so you basically reopen right after that. So, I don't know. They need to look for more of that, because in Alexander, I can remember so many times where there's so many things that I was like, I'll never use that. I'm like, oh crap, I should use that. or that is really important to do mantra right now because we're running away from a ball or some like some of those crazy parts of Alexander that really pushed us.
I love Alexander, and it sounds to me like raiding was, because I was not raiding at that time, but I've heard many of the stories. I was just getting into extreme primals and things. Alexander is so wacky and so fun, and it was a static breaker in many spots, and the balance of classes at that time was a complete disaster. But it is creative, right? Like, you don't know what you're getting when you step into different portions of that. And while I totally understand moving to a more, streamlined format, it makes it easier for production. It makes it easier for people to have a general idea of how a fight is going to go and how a tier is going to go. I do miss going in with these classes and being like, oh, this time we're on a grate and there's lava, but oh god, we died. Somebody get that one and drag it into the lava. See what happens.
Right.
That's fun. And I really would love to see, talking about class evolutions and things. I mean, I think we are in such a better place balance-wise, all of our classes. Seeing something creative that tests the community on how they approach and think about the game and the skills that they use to engage with most of that content, or the logic that we use, that we just kind of hone and fine tune, so that the more you go into those fights, you're like, oh yeah, this is like that, that's like that from that boss in this one, and you're like, oh great, we'll just do X strategy. I want something again that makes us go, what? For 2 seconds, where we're like, this is not what I thought. How do we now what do we have? What could address this? What answers this question? And we've seen a few of those moments in Ultimates and things, and they're there, but I'm hoping we get to see more now that the game is maybe a little more steady with our classes.
I kind of wish we had some trash mobs in raid dungeons.
Yeah.
Like in our Savage raids.
I remember
it takes
mobs.
30 minutes to go to to get to the boss.
Trash.
But something a couple pulls, something that the tanks have to, pull adds apart, or something just we're not okay, let's zone in. Oh hey, here's the boss,
Yeah.
I'd like to have a little scenery of getting there or something. Have a walk of death when you
Yeah. Give me the slide into whatever Alexander that was. Where you had to get in, you had to slide down, but do stuff during it. We got duty actions.
Let me do
one. Let me do a kickflip while I'm sliding down. It's fun.
There you go. All right. So I think
we did it.
Yeah, that went way longer than I thought it would.
I'm sure
like,
there are
this will probably be a shorter episode. It'll be fine. Yeah, there's a lot there.
Especially with covering all of the class types.
Right? I'm looking at the clock as we're going. I'm like, right, that's one. That's one down. How many more do we have?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Turns out there's been a lot of changes with a lot of classes.
Yeah. All right. So before we go here, this month we've been talking about a couple of charities that Gamer Escape has been giving to this month. Michelle, Zanidra, you want to take that?
I got it. So you guys, as you know, America needs a boost toward being a better country for all. And if you'd like to help, but you don't know where to start, we'd like to suggest the Bail Project and the Trevor Project, as we have been doing for the past couple weeks. You can see them on a slide. If you can't see them because you're listening, it is bailproject.org and thetrevorproject.org. Bail Project provides bail to incarcerated people that don't have the funds to do it themselves, because being stuck in prison and unable to perform functions of daily life while waiting for literal months to go to trial can absolutely screw over your life, even if you do eventually have an innocent verdict. And the Trevor Project is the world's largest suicide prevention and crisis intervention organization for LGBTQ plus young people. They provide 24/7 life-saving support via phone, text, and chat. Finally, please also remember that even after these issues fall out of top news, they're still around. They're not just gone. So keep an eye on that. Watch out for everybody around you, and hopefully we can give America that boost that it needs.
As a little footnote.
Oh
yeah.
A little footnote: the Bail Project is specifically for protesters or activists who are working with the Black Lives Matter movement. And there are different regional city like versions of it or branches of it that you can also contribute to directly if you'd like to support the efforts in your own personal city.
Yep.
There are also projects beyond the Bill Project that don't deal with just this. They deal with other things like people who've been incarcerated by ICE. So if that's something that's near and dear to your heart, then look into that as well.
These are only two. These are the ones that we've given to. And so, if there's something a little more focused that you want to, I mean, there's a lot of different things out there right now. So definitely, take a look and, help where you can. Rook, I know you've been doing stuff for Trevor Project this month. I know you hit your first goal like in 10 minutes or something when you started this. I saw you raised your goal again the other day. How has that been going for you?
It's good. We cracked 3,000. We're working towards 3,500. And our team overall, Rainbow Arcade, some of whom were guests on our Pride Month episode, has cracked now over $40,000 together for the Trevor Project.
Mm-hmm.
That's insane.
That's almost twice what you had last week, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
grown really quickly.
totally crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was watching Angel a little bit after that. That was his first podcast he's ever been on. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah, he was so excited. That was awesome. I thought that was such a great episode. I've been away. I've like June for IRL, even without E3 this year. Like I had my wedding anniversary, I had my birthday, so that's why I haven't been around. Did end up tuning in though for that episode for the LGBTQ plus episode. Amazing job. I want to say I thought everybody that we had on was amazing. The discussion was fantastic. So thank you for that. If you haven't seen that yet, please go do that. This is episode 170. So that was 168. Make sure to go check that out for sure. Before we close out here, Monte, we want to thank you for joining us today. Do you have any shout outs that you'd like to give?
Nope.
Tell us where we can find you.
Oh, that's easy.
Sorry. It's Monty Mustache, not after the streamer person, but it's actually I think Twitter is Monty412. Yeah, either way. Twitch is Monty Mustache, and I stream late night games generally when everybody's asleep in my house, so I have time to not have people screaming or hear the TV because that's always fun. But yeah, I just play old games, play new games. Now I just started doing The Last of Us 2 last night, so I plan on doing that until I finish it. It's all I got.
Great.
All right. If you want, you can email us, aetheryteradio@gamerscape.com. You can tweet at us at aetheryteradio @gamerscape. You can also follow us on Facebook, Gamerscape, Discord, discord.gg/Gamerscape. Questions, comments, anything like that you got, send them on over. And that will do it for us here this week. And we will see you guys next time. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.